Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see. What if Harry Potter participated in Hunger Games? Join Patreon for early access exclusive content of Super Op stories. Also contents that's too far for YouTube. You will get 400 content there, please do check that too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. Harry Potter. The glass-eyed boy's hands stopped quivering. The chill of the fog had disappeared, and all that was left was his warming cheeks as he spotted his face on identically humongous screens. The other boys around him began to whisper, grins and sighs of relief emanating from their mouths. Harry wanted to ask what was going on, but found that his lips were shut tight, so he remained frozen in place, staring at the screens until one of the people behind him pushed him forward. The action became a precedent as others copied the boy's action. Yet the whispering never stopped. Harry twinged in agitation as he finally surged to his feet and pulled himself away from the pushing hands. He ignored some snickers that vibrated through the crowd and finally stepped on the stage. His thoughts of confusion momentarily gone, Harry stiffly nodded at the exuberant lady before him before coming to stand by the only other person on stage. A voice hissed something inside his mind, and Harry found himself imitating the name, Katniss Everdeen? The girl beside him rose her head, and Harry finally got a good glimpse of the other person beside him. She was tall and gaunt, with stormy gray eyes that plagued Harry's thoughts. Her brown hair was intricately tied back as she raised one eyebrow at him discreetly. Is that her name? However, before Harry could think or do any more, the lady turned to them. She smiled, a big, plastic thing in the shape of an unusual tainted pair of lips. She gestured to the crowd and then to them. Tributes, she announced in a high tone. Shake hands. Harry's body instinctively turned to face Katniss. Her expression hadn't changed much, but it softened to a little degree. Harry was sure that she would have appeared prettier if not for her cold demeanor. His hand firmly shook hers before they were ushered away. But as they were led far from the crowd, Harry chanced to look back. In the dispersing audience lingered three grim faces. One was a boy or man, holding a little blonde angel against his chest. The girl was crying as she reverently sent looks of worry at the girl beside him. The last face belonged to a boy who looked as if someone had just torn his heart from his body. Something told him that whatever they were tributes for, it wasn't for any festival. Strangely enough, this discovery did not shake Harry as his eyes looked at the path before him. Harry decided that if he could survive going against dangerous dragons, possessive mermaids, and Professor Snape's classes, he was fairly confident that he could as well pull through this one. He wasn't one to contemplate too much on his own. He preferred to keep that habit happening during school, but Cedric couldn't help it. He paced the random, vacant room he was placed in so suddenly. Playing by ear, he could tell that the other girl that stepped up on the platform beside him was hosting some visitors, crying, wailing visitors. This observation alone did not comfort Cedric. What kind of sick games was he being a tribute in that would require one's family to burst into tears? Surely these games weren't some sick sport, were they? Shaking his head at this newest thought, Cedric sat on one of the chairs in the room. He couldn't afford the luxury of worrying now. All he had to do was find the others and get out of the world they were in. Besides, where is my wand? He wondered. He was quite sure he had it throughout the whole ceremony earlier. Maybe he had dropped it in the crowd? Had he? His thinking stopped there as an old man entered the room. He was dressed in haggard clothing, clad in a tattered overcoat and equipped with a decaying cane. The man reminded him of the wizards he passed in Diagon Alley's dark corners. "Can I help you, sir?" asked Cedric. He, for one, did not expect to receive any visitors at all. He had no relatives nor friends in this place. Cedric was a magical being, not some muggle trapped in a twisted world. The man did not answer him. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a familiar-looking wand. Jumping to his feet, Cedric walked closer to him to get a closer inspection of it. "Where did you find this?" he questioned, taking his wand. It became warm in his hand as a familiar sensation flowed through him. Perhaps the feeling was to be a reminder of what he was, that he didn't belong here. Cedric looked up, about to thank the man for his kindness, but realized he was once again alone. Not only that, but the sobbing had quieted down and the other room was as quiet as his. A soft knock echoed throughout the room. "Come in," said Cedric hesitantly. The door opened, revealing the girl from before. Naturally, Cedric smiled in greeting. As tributes from the same place or district as the locals called it, he thought that it would be best if he got along with his new teammate. And so, he made a note to never forget her face. That won't be so hard, Cedric thought. For the blazing red hair and the foxy-like features, she would be hard-faced to forget. Fleur was sick. She was sick and disgusted. How could people watch kids fight for their lives? What kind of entertainment was that? Fleur frowned as she stopped pacing and sat down on a couch. Her arms wrapped around her lithe form as she stared out the window. Buildings flashed before her eyes, and she shut them tightly. The scenery wasn't helping. "Well, hello there." A new voice greeted them. Crumb stopped looking at Fleur and stared at a spunky-dressed woman. His eyes narrowed, and he crossed his arms across his broad chest. "That are you doing here?" he snarled. He, too, was disgusted with the information he and Fleur had acquired through that strange lady's speech. The woman smirked as she leaned against the doorway, a flash of light momentarily blinding the two. "Oh, come now. Don't tell me you don't recognize me," she said. Fleur frowned and shook her head at the same time Crumb did. The woman frowned as her playful aura disappeared. Her hand reappeared again, and Fleur's eyes widened as Crumb scowled. "Now that is insulting," she said, aiming at one of them. The two foreign tributes barely had time to react before Fleur screamed bloody murder whilst Crumb's face darkened ever more. For people walk into a bar. Revised April 22, 2012. In this world, Harry had learned, there was no law dictating whether something was just or right. There was only that constant fear. He could spot it from a mile away in those eyes of the district people. He even saw it in Katniss's rough exterior once. And as the hours passed by, and the information he had been gathering piled, Harry began to feel the very same fear settle in him as well. The glass-eyed boy stared at his future mentor. Honestly, he would it hard to comprehend that the drunkard had ever successfully survived through the Hunger Games. Based on the details he had exploited from Katniss, you had to be smart, tough, and quick on your feet. Not tipsy and God knows what else. Also, there was the strange and ever so reprimanding Effie Trinket. She had taken to chastising him and Katniss whenever she could about how low their chances of survival were and their poor table manners. And as much as Harry would have wanted to, he would have held back his ravenous instincts from devouring everything in sight. But really, was it their fault at all? Harry couldn't easily recall the last time he ever had a decent meal, and that truly bothered him. As for Katniss, he could remember the starvation evidently sketched onto her body and understood why at least she had to eat like she did. Harry didn't, and that was the part that frustrated him. How long since he really had last eaten? Why hadn't he just been fed this morning at the Great Hall? The memories were still fresh in Harry's mind. Ron stuffing his face, the twins teasing him, Hermione quietly reading a book in the corner, and the jittery feeling in his stomach as he first laid eyes on the tormenting maze. Unconsciously, he felt his wand in his pocket. He was fortunate of having it with him. He could use his magic to the best of his abilities and provide him a way of survival, or if he could, an escape. Because for all he knew, he didn't want to participate in these games. And by the sound of things, neither did Katniss. But what about Cedric and the others? What if they're part of the bloody games too? Harry groaned at this high possibility and resisted the urge to slam his head on the desk. The girl, Katniss, flashed him a strange glance. Somewhere in their shared silence, they had finally swallowed the fact that one or none of them would be coming out after the yearly game. Bloody heck? The two foreign wizards' heads shot up. "What's happened to you?" asked Cedric. He stepped into the elevator with them and pressed the button leading up to his temporary room. Crumb made the motion to slam his hand on all of the floor buttons. "Have you seen Harry yet?" Fleur questioned, sulking into a corner of the tiny space they were entrapped in. Cedric shook his head, his own worries about the boy roaring in his mind. Harry was young yet qualified to be entered in the games. If he had to face him as well, Cedric refused to think of it. Fleur nodded before burying her face into her palms. Cedric almost closed the space between them in a heartbeat if not for Crumb. He put a hand out to stop him. "Tribute?" he asked. Cedric shrugged. Unfortunately. His eyes wandered back to the injury on his shoulder. Victor saw his wavering gaze and grunted. "Vest you don't ask." His deep voice rumbled, subconsciously rubbing the bandaging. Fleur flared at this statement as she rose back to her feet. Her eyes were fiery with hatred as she placed a delicate hand on Cedric's jacket. "You see that? That is what our mentor did to him." Her hand curled into a fist, crinkling that region of the cotton fabric. "Oh, Cedric, what do we do?" The rain pouring out, Fleur's fire dispersed with her composure as she crumpled into his arms. Cedric could do nothing but keep her up in his embrace. "Would you like to hear a joke, Ronnykins?" George muzzled up his younger brother's hair. Ron merely scowled, not open to the idea of being his brother's victim. He threw a pleading glance at Hermione, but she too seemed to live in the maze. Clinging onto the edge of her seat for dear life, she stared and waited. Ron sighed and nodded his head. "All right," Fred began, his head popping out from the other side. "For people walk into a bar. One is a jester," George cut off. "Another is a ghost. The third is a goblin, and the other is a wizard," they both exclaimed. Ron restrained from rolling his eyes. He mumbled something incoherent, and the twins just chuckled at it in response. So they go up to the bartender and he asks, "What can I get you fellas?" George said in a Western accent. The jester said he wanted to kill someone, and the ghost said he needed a place to haunt. The bartender says he can't allow either to happen and looks at the other two. The goblin wants to steal his money. And the wizard? Fred looked to Ron for the answer. Ron shrugged. "What? He wanted a wand?" he offered. The twins shook their heads. "Of course not, Ronnykins. That's delirious. Every person knows a wizard always has a wand with them," Fred deduced. The youngest Weasley glanced at the clock in front of them. It had been approximately 15 minutes since the champions had entered the maze. No sound from them has been heard since. Tapping his foot, Ron urged his brothers to finish the joke. The wizard wanted new companions. George said without preamble. So the bartender says, "I'll be your companion." The jester kills him. Ron's eyes widen. After, the ghost decided to haunt the bar. The goblin steals the money, and as for the wizard, he sighs and says, "I never get anything I want." When the twins say this, they laughed. Ron is anything but mildly disturbed. "Bloody heck?" Fred shoots him a fleeting glare. "No, no, no. We're not done yet." "Yes." The goblin, after stealing the money, sits beside the drinking wizard and tells him he could just magic himself some new friends. So he did. They laughed. Ron shook his head. "That is sick," he commented. The twins shrugged and thought about their joke. A full minute elapsed before the realization dawned upon them. "You're right, it is," George mumbled. "Ah well. It was nice talking to you, Ronnykins." Fred re-ruffled his hair as they left. Ron grumbled as he repeated the so-called joke in his head. There was no way that it was amusing. It was bloody, gory, and wrong. Yet he could not stop but make comparisons with the people from the joke and the champions. Crumb would have been the jester, Cedric the ghost. Meanwhile, Fleur would have become the goblin, whilst Harry the oblivious wizard. As for the bartender, the Tri-Wizard Tournament Cup. No, Ron thought. The twins couldn't have been insinuating that someone was going to die today, right? He couldn't be thinking that idea, right? Ron shut his eyes to prepare for the upcoming headache. He hated Fred and George very much, and he didn't need any help from alcohol to realize that. It was the night after their extravagant entrance into the capital, and all of them were seated around a decent-sized television watching all of the district's reapings. So far, they had only gotten through one, and both tributes from that side seemed eager to take part in these games. Then the next one came, and Harry could have sworn that the girl was born a murderer with that look on her face, and that the boy was incensed for volunteering. Cato What's-His-Name obviously held no relationship with the previously chosen boy. After that, The next rounds of tributes were holding less promise in providing an actual good competition. Sure, there was District 4, but Haymitch had taken into informing him that they had 1 and 2 were considered the career tributes who were trained to do this thing, trained to kill and win. And so, as the scenes progressed, Harry began to question the logicality of all this until he saw 3 familiar-looking faces. They were here. They were a part of the Hunger Games too. Harry had shut his mind from the world after that, and it was until he saw District 11's tributes did something other than worry and fear reign his body. That girl. She had to be no more than 10 years old. Yet here she was about to march her way into death's hands. She was a quaint little girl, dark skin and hair. She looked fragile, and Harry quickly began to wonder if anyone was going to volunteer for her. His chest burned in anger when no one did, and finally it was their district. Harry was completely caught off guard as he saw Katniss volunteer in place of her sister. Flashing a quick glance at the gray-eyed girl, his respect for her instantly grew at this new information. And then his face showed, and Harry, too, was surprised to see that he looked indifferent among them all. But that was just it. Harry James Potter, was already used to facing death. Now, it was just a matter of time before it came chasing him. They had agreed to work together to pose as a team. Whether it would prove that they were a threat, it didn't matter. Harry and Katniss wanted to live for as long as they could. And since nothing could be guaranteed for their survival rate in the games, they decided that having someone watch your back was as comforting as knowing they might actually make it through. Harry stared at his clammy palms. He hadn't had contact with the wizarding world since then. And his wand? He had lost his wand. Woke up without by his side. This troubled Harry the most. He needed that wand if he wanted to live. "Are you sure you'll be fine?" asked Katniss. She had been trying to warm up with him since they straightened Haymitch out. She was an awkward girl, but Harry figured that he could be worse. "Yeah, just nervous," he admitted. This was his first time to see all of the tributes. Katniss gave him a small smile in return. This was one of the rare times it had ever happened. "Me too," she whispered as they reached the training facility. When they entered the room, his act had fallen apart. Before him were 4 pairs of equally terrified eyes. At least one of them was going to die. Learn when you are young. Revised April 22, 2012. They had agreed to work together to pose as a team. Whether it would prove that they were a threat, it didn't matter. Harry and Katniss wanted to live for as long as they could. And since nothing could be guaranteed for their survival rate in the games, they decided that having someone watch your back was as comforting as knowing they might actually make it through. Harry stared at his clammy palms. He hadn't had contact with the wizarding world since then. And his wand? He had lost his wand. Woke up without by his side. This troubled Harry the most. He needed that wand if he wanted to live. "Are you sure you'll be fine?" asked Katniss. She had been trying to warm up with him since they straightened Haymitch out. She was an awkward girl, but Harry figured that he could be worse. "Yeah, just nervous," he admitted. This was his first time to see all of the tributes. Katniss gave him a small smile in return. This was one of the rare times it had ever happened. "Me too," she whispered as they reached the training facility. When they entered the room, his act had fallen apart. Before him were 4 pairs of equally terrified eyes. At least one of them was going to die. But really, Harry thought that this was the worst plan ever. To pose as friends? Comrades? Harry began to doubt his trust on Haymitch's advice. How was he to ever assist someone as stubborn and cold as Katniss Everdeen? Surely he did not expect Haymitch to bother, understanding his pain, but still, he also had other people to worry about. Clearly, there had to be a way out of this. Disturbed and irked, Harry could only watch as Cedric and the others attempted to gather around him. He knew that the others were all antsy with anticipation and wanted to reacquaint with him. But with the setup his mentor had given him, he couldn't leave his partner all alone. Partner, Harry glanced at Katniss with this thought. Unlike him, she had focused on the other competitors and the particular activities that they were being offered. Since losing his wand, Harry thought that it would be wise to pick up some trick or two. So with one of the instructors concluding their speech, Harry turned to Katniss. The brown-eyed girl looked at him and then at the knot-tying section. In an instant, Harry had his haggard mop of chocolate shaking. No, he said. Katniss raised an eyebrow. No? She repeated. Don't you remember what Haymitch said? She asked. Harry shrugged. Yeah, I do. But seriously? Noitaing? He watched as the others headed off to more vulgar sections. I just think we should learn more useful techniques than that, he stated. Katniss frowned. Yeah? Like what? We can't exactly risk showing off any skill. Haymitch said what? Katniss, his accent drawled out her name. I want to live and you want to live. So why don't we work on a compromise? And go learn something mediocre? He suggested. The sound of dummies perishing under one of the tribute's wrath was making him more nervous. That dummy could have been him. His bones could have been crushed with that single blow. Harry shuddered and shook these pessimistic thoughts away from his mind. Fine. Katniss sighed. Got any ideas? Harry's eyes flickered over to the area covered with plants. It seemed easy enough to learn whatever skill that place offered. And plus, he wouldn't have to worry about not looking like a shrimp to anyone. He was just going to simply learn how to spot what's eatable and what is not. In all honesty, I'm quite happy that I've got visitors this year. Last time I had none. Nada. The trainer laughed. Deciding it would be best to play tension breaker, he chuckled along with the trainer's humor. He nudged Katniss to do the same, but she remained stoic as ever. Harry sighed. Was this girl ever going to let her mask come down? He thought not. Hey, have you been listening, boy? The trainer called him out of his reverie. Harry nodded, causing the woman to smirk. Sure? All right. Then tell me which of these two plants are poisonous, she said. Harry fumbled over his next set of words. What was he kidding? If he couldn't pass potions, how was he going to pass this? Memorization was never one of his key traits. That one? He guessed, pointing at the prickly plant. Beside him, Katniss stifled her smirk. The trainer shook her head. Wrong answer. None of them are. She huffed and glanced at Katniss. You sure you want to work with this one? He doesn't look like a survivor. Her eyes quickly scanned him over. Or a fighter to me. Too lanky. Katniss shrugged, wanting to keep her opinions to herself. This caused the instructor to raise one finely thinned eyebrow. Yet she did not push. Not much of a talker, I see. Oh well, I tried. Have you? She looked pointedly at Harry, and he too remained stoic. I think I'm coming through, he replied. The woman laughed again, but this time, there was a sense of coldness in her giddiness. Clapping her hands together, she began to teach her specialty. Why is he avoiding Vuz? Fleur whispered. The trio were currently practicing how to shoot arrows, and although she was making little to no progress at all, the place was secluded enough to keep quiet and tight-lipped conversations. Cedric shrugged, releasing another arrow into a dummy's cheek. Their teacher came by with a mumbled praise as he walked over to the lone crumb. It would have appeared that all his predatory skills were outmatched by the bow and arrow. Maybe he's roped into something. Plan, perhaps, Cedric offered, reaching for her bundle of arrows. Whilst he had run out of them, Fleur still had plenty to share. The French woman grunted as she tossed the whole package of ammunition to him. A plan? She huffed. What plan could Zir be, but get out of air? She asked. Cedric shared an elusive look with Crumb. He nodded in comprehension and gathered his things. Giving a small sign of recognition to the worrying Fleur, he headed off to a different section of the vast room. He could be figuring a way to get out of here with all of us alive, sighed Cedric. Listen, he placed a hand on her quivering shoulder. I know you're scared, but try and keep a clear mind. We need everyone sane if we want to get out. Admittedly, Fleur gave into his words and picked up her bow again. Taking an arrow from the pack, she let out a held breath and let go of the arrow. The next thing she saw was its head ripping through a dummy's chest. Harry. The boy jumped at the sudden bulky company. He glanced between Katniss and the other approaching tribute before nodding towards Victor. For some reason, his hands were growing clammy and his body? He was trying not to shake all over. Kroner. Harry froze as Crumb faced the tribute. He was lean but his muscles were highlighted through his fitting shirt. He spared Harry a brief glance as he looked at Crumb. Want to spar? Victor sized him up, and it was too late for Harry to answer for him when Victor nodded his head. I will. Harry, he nodded at him again as he left with the new tribute. Katniss quietly crept back to his side. When she was younger, she used to blurt things out to her mother, tell her horrid things about District 12 and the events that happened behind closed doors. It was back then did she learn to keep her tongue and put on an indifferent mask. She learned to adapt to a quiet life, never speaking out of term. She was afraid for her mother, and did not desire for her sister to start mimicking her words. Anyway, her steely eyes looked up at Harry. There was enough death in the world already. Are you okay? She asked. Harry's face now mirrored hers, but unlike her current expression, his showed no sympathy or concern at all. Just fine. Victor knew he was being reckless. He knew that Cedric would disapprove of this, but so what? He needed to release some rankled feelings in his chest. He needed to breathe and let go. Hopping into the makeshift arena, he grabbed onto the railing for some support. What's your name? The boy questioned, positioning himself into a defensive stance. He slowly began to tread towards his foe's territory, and Victor made sure to leave himself as much room as possible. Victor, he answered, his Bulgarian accent slipping off his tongue. He lunged forward, aiming to harm his opponent's face, but the boy swiftly stepped to the right and planted his own fist into Crumb's cheek. The contact was loud and painful, but Crumb did not let that on. He swiveled around and began to throw punches at the boy, and despite his many hits, none were too effective against him. The boy smirked as he pranced around his new friend. Cato, he said, dodging another fist. His hand stopped the other one as he brought his knee up. Crumb expected this and pushed it back down with his other hand. He twisted his arm out of Cato's grip and moved back. I never asked. He grunted, watching as the kid's face formed a grin. Oh, just thought you should know. His grin grew wider as he landed another hit on Crumb. After all, he stepped back as Victor's fist grazed his face. Why shouldn't you not know the person who beat you today? Crumb's patience was burned to ashes. Unleashing an unknown fury, he drove past Cato's defenses and brought his hand heavily down against Cato's face. His body went timbered down as he clutched onto the place of contact. Struggling to get up, he coughed blood as he wiped the liquid from the scratch on his cheek. Growing attachments. The dark, murky waters roared at the boats threateningly. Harry stared at his wavering reflection, wondering if all of this was just a dream. He had overcome countless challenges in the past, but had he done them so willingly? The scores glared at him in white, transcending lights. He hadn't expected to pull such a score as that, but with a furtive glance at Katniss, he knew that if he was going to win, he would have to try harder. On the other hand, Katniss' mouth was almost agape. She too was surprised with her score. Looking back on her performance, she thought that she would have gotten something less than this in 11. She glanced at Harry and hoped that he didn't feel the least bit intimidated with what she got. She didn't mean to outshine him, but did she even have a choice to begin with? Katniss had a family to go back to and support. As for Harry, he told her he had no one but friends. If the two were to compare what they had, Katniss was confident that she would have a better reason for staying alive. Though the only problem with that conclusion was that she couldn't let him die. Not by her hands nor anyone's. It would just be wrong, and honestly, Katniss could hardly see a boy like Harry go down so easily. Especially if it was because of some stupid game. I'm going to rest now, Harry stated, silently standing up. In the back of her mind, Katniss felt as if she should go with him as well. Good night, everyone, murmured Harry. Good night, Harry. Seconds arose into 2 full minutes before Katniss, too, stood up. Truly, she wanted to be refined and bid everyone else a good night too, but her mind was too clouded with thoughts to begin with. So she left them silently and whisked her body towards the hallway. However, just as she was about to enter her room, another door opened. Katniss's eyes flickered to the location of the sound and landed briefly on the outline of a lanky figure before blinking away. She rested her hand on the door, feeling its cold exterior pass through her system. Congratulations on your score, Katniss, Harry commented, leaning against his own room's door frame. He had just taken a shower, hoping to get rid of tonight's excitement. So his eyes had to strain to see past the dimmed lighting and the wet hair strands that clung to his face. Katniss remained silent. I would rather have you get the top score rather than those other tributes. So yeah, congrats. He admitted, continuing as if he was oblivious to her discomfort. And then the silence reigned on as Harry was subdued into its entity. He stared at the floor, sometimes glancing up to see whether or not she was planning to say anything in reply. 1, 2, Harry thought, counting the seconds that passed by. The seconds turned into a handful of minutes, and Katniss soon heard him softly sigh. She picked up the distinctive noise of water droplets, hitting the surface of the floor and walls as Harry slowly retreated back into his room. The said girl grit her teeth together, wishing for some form of words to stream out of her mouth. But she just stood there pathetically still. Her hand landed on the knob of the door as Harry's own door closed. The lock clicked, and Katniss finally spoke. Good night, Harry. Meanwhile, 2 floors above them, Fleur was pacing back and forth in her room. She had seen her score, a well-shaped 8, and wondered how she would deal with the other tributes who had done better than her. No matter, she finally thought, conceding into Cedric's previous words from before. Fleur gracefully sat on the edge of her bed and laced her hands together in her lap. She could make it through this and take everything one step at a time. After all, what did she have to worry about? She had Cedric and Krum. Put the 2 together, and she assured herself that nothing would be able to touch the 3 of them. They would be able to manage through the games. Fleur's eyes narrowed as someone carefully entered her room. A girl with hair as white as now quietly crept inside, balancing a new array of clothes she specifically ordered, and a tiny envelope. Fleur had often tried to speak to her during her first night in the dreaded building, but found that conversation with the mute being was simply impossible. Her hand flicked up as the child set her belongings down. With a slow and languid movement, she shooed the girl out. She took the envelope first and slipped its content out. Fleur, already, she could tell that the person who wrote it had rushed and was a boy. The handwriting was simple and a bit messy, but she would make do with what she had. Meet me at the rooftop tonight. Don't get caught, and if you do, make up an excuse. No one needs to know. Sincerely, CD. Rereading it once more to check through, Fleur's face turned grim as she hid the letter underneath her pillow. CD? Fleur wanted nothing more but to scoff. Couldn't Cedric have been more discreet with his name? Almost everyone would be able to guess that it was him who wrote it. No other boy had shown the slightest bit of associating with her besides Krum, and his initials were obviously not CD. Fleur sighed as she ran her fingers through her new silk nightgown. She was tired of the cotton that she was given to sleep with. They were too rough on her delicate skin and irritated her to a high degree, but now, having it replaced with this, Fleur wanted nothing more but to grin merrily. She glanced at the clock. It was almost 11. She'd be seeing Cedric in 10 minutes. You don't speak much, do you? Cedric chuckled. He was at the dinner table, counting the minutes till he would have to go up until a little fiery-headed girl walked in to join him. Foxface, as Cedric called her, merely looked up with disinterested eyes. She only paused enough to gather his appearance in before heading off into a different room quietly. Cedric noted that, in amusement, she moved very quietly. Cedric's lips quirked into an entertained smile as he recalled the time when Foxface nearly scared the lights out of him. He had just walked out of the bathroom and suddenly, she was right there. It hadn't been more than 5 seconds, and she had randomly appeared in front of him. Speaking of the devil, Cedric's eyes inconspicuously watched as she sat far away from him. She carried a glass of milk in one hand and a plate of dinner's leftover dessert. If he thought about it real hard, he would have also noted how she refused to eat any form of sweets in front of him and their mentor. The reason for this remained unknown, and Cedric really didn't want to jump into her secrecy to even find out. You can stop staring. Cedric's head shot up. That voice? Her voice. Cedric casually rested his head on the palm of his hand and fully turned to face her. The smile was back on his face as he watched her scrunch up her nose at him. He guessed that she was probably annoyed or frustrated with him, and truthfully he really didn't mind. You should speak more. You have a demure little voice, he commented. Foxface rolled her eyes as she focused back on her snack. She only wanted him to look away, not pay more attention to her. Maybe she would have to return to her old strategy of not talking to him at all. Foxface. Her eyes snapped at him with a vicious glint. I know you have a name, but I like the nickname I gave for you, said Cedric. Nicknames only show that you've grown an attachment to someone. Foxface replied quietly. Cedric raised an eyebrow. He got her talking. That was shocking. Nevertheless, he kept that emotion disguised as he urged her to continue on. Foxface sighed. You shouldn't get attached to me. She said it like it was so obvious. Cedric did not understand. Why not? I might die. Then also suddenly, the clock chimed, indicating that a new hour is arriving. Cedric sprung to his feet and flashed Foxface a lopsided smile. Good night, Foxface. The crowd was wild. Everyone from the television screens to the ones actually present in soul and body were cheering them on. Harry felt like he had just won a tournament, the Triwizard Tournament. But he couldn't have. The painstaking reminder that this was all fake, and that he was basically being sentenced to death, chained him by the hand by Katniss's hand. She stood there with him, holding his hand in a slackening grip. Despite the overzealous feeling that threatened to overwhelm them, she was unsure of all this. Like him, she knew what was at stake here. She knew the real purpose behind all this. Harry tightened his grasp and looked straight ahead. Cinna's words were still vibrating through his head, and he planned to follow them. Harry Potter and Katniss Everdeen were going to leave a mark on this day. The crowd would never forget them. Krum was like a rock. He stood like one, was tough like one, and his face almost resembled one. The chiseled features were a gift from both his genes and the hard, vigorous training he had undergone to become one of the best Quidditch players in the world. Back then, he saw his life showered in a glory only rewarded through beating the other team, not by killing others. His eyes, steadfast, watched as Fleur continued to pace like before, and kept an eye on a calm Cedric. The boy had tried to make amends with Fleur after his flimsy joke about their chances of escaping this strange world. Krum thought he was an idiot for even bringing such a topic up with Fleur. Another part of him couldn't really blame Cedric for attempting to brighten things up.
Where is Harry?
Where is he? Fleur finally spoke up. Cedric shrugged as he found a place to sit on. He had, after much persuasion, gotten one of the people working with Harry to hand him a note. Whether or not he got it, Cedric would never know. What do you mean you don't know? Isn't E your friend? She snapped. Again, Cedric remained silent. After dealing with countless of girls in the past, some mirroring Fleur, he knew that answering back would only get him into more trouble. Fleur sighed. If only we add our wands. Krum nodded at this. Do you have your wand? He asked, looking over at Cedric. At this point, Cedric's smile popped up again and turned into a grin. Reaching into the back pocket of his jeans, he produced out a familiar wooden stick intricately carved and created by one of the finest wand makers in the world. But of course, he said proudly. Fleur nearly did a double take at this. But how? We have lost ours since the arrival, she exclaimed. Krum did not add his own thoughts and waited for Cedric to reply. I did too, but this old man gave it back to me. You know? Before we came here I got it from him, he said. Fleur frowned and looked anything but beautiful right now. She took a seat on the ledge of the slanted part of the roof and looked out at the city. The lights were captivating and glimmered in all sorts of colors. If their predicament was a bit more peaceful, Fleur would have loved to sit there and admire its beauty all day. Krum didn't and took charge. You have a plan? He asked Cedric. The said boy pocketed his wand again and flashed the bulky teenager a grin. He stood up and dusted off the dirt that had gathered on his jeans and nodded his head. But of course, he said, I am going to hope no one got confused with the italicized part in the chapter. You know, when Harry and Katniss are presenting themselves in the rocking outfits Cinna made for them. Because that part was part of a dream. Someone's dream, to be more precise. Someone important. Hope you liked it. Involving interviews, a platform of many kinds, among a stadium of people graced with strange accents and proper etiquette, stood out in many of the tribute's mind. Those who had little to fret over paid no heed to the overwhelming attendance that would appear in 2 to 3 nights' time, and focused primarily on what they would wear. All the girls had been conscious since District 12 had revealed their prized beauty, the boys being too egotistical to worry about the said district's counterpart. Fleur was among these group of girls who only worried about their appearance. She was already blessed with good manners, proper posture, and a charming personality. Even if she did believe she was as beautiful as anybody else, she was a girl. She had her insecurities. Stressed for the upcoming event, Fleur paced throughout the whole dressing room. Her stylists stared at her in an uncomprehending dishevel as they carried in her said desires. Like her, they too wanted to outshine Cinna's creation, but found it difficult with an obstinate model. "Dear," one of them cautiously called out. Fleur stopped in her tracks. With a dragged silence, she turned to her hairdresser. She had grown a particularly fond dislike for him. As she reminiscently twisted a lock of her hair around her finger, it was cut 2 inches shorter than she wanted. "So sorry about my abrupt appearance, but I do believe that I have a meeting with sweet Fleur here." Her mentor barged in. The stylists exchanged worried glances before ushering themselves out of the room without another word. Fleur let out a huff as she fell gracefully on a couch. The interviews were coming just too soon for her taste. "Yes," she finally said, noting the stare she was receiving. She let out a sigh as she motioned for her mentor to come in and take a seat. Whatever invitation she needed, Fleur would reluctantly give it to her. "We must talk about your tactics for the interviews," her mentor began. She flicked an auburn strand of hair out of her face. After all, Fleur's mentor was one of the most recent champions for their district. The pink scar on her face was enough evidence to prove that. 1. You cannot expect to just worry about your clothes and hair. There's much more important things than that. And 2. We should try and get rid of your accent. It's quite what, Lilibeth? This accent you speak of will not get in the way of anything." Fleur cut her off. Lilibeth shrugged nonchalantly at this as if to say, "I tried," and continued on with her practice speech. After 3 hours of going through a grueling trial and effect period with Crumb, she was practically used to their foreign arrogance. "Well, fine. We leave your accent. Now what about your tactics? How do you plan to handle yourself in front of the whole capital and gain as much sponsors as you can?" she asked. Fleur smiled disarmingly. "Simple. Charm, grace, and beauty." Lilibeth scoffed. "You will need more than that, Fleur. Surely you have other means of wooing them over." "Did I fail to mention charm?" The said woman blinked innocently, as if recalling her previous statement. Her tone too was fixed to sound dumbfounded. Mystified, Lilibeth took a second to compose herself before shaking her head slowly. Fleur's smile transformed into a smirk. "See? I charm and fool. What is more that you want?" Lilibeth rose from her seat. She nodded off to Fleur with a small smile before walking out. She couldn't believe that she had been fooled for a second back there. Fleur almost had her thinking she indeed was an innocent girl being sent to death and didn't even know it. "Humph," she thought, crossing her arms. "Let's just see how well she fares in the arena itself." "Sorry?" Cedric looked at the stylist in front of him. She nodded and tugged at the dress as if to emphasize her need for it. Cedric shook his head and tugged back towards his direction. "Can't, sorry. My partner needs this. After all, it was made for her." Cedric watched as the stylist's face slowly turned into a melancholic smile. The boy, raised to be a gentleman, felt guilt crawl into his system. "Can't you tell your tribute that she can just have another one made for her? Preferably not resembling this one too much, of course," he said. The stylist timidly nodded her head and made a point to leave him if not for Cedric calling out to her. She turned around with a quirked eyebrow. "If you don't mind me asking, but who is your tribute?" he asked. The stylist offered a small smile with her answer, "Miss Fleur." Cedric chuckled at that as he gazed back down at the dress he held. Figures, he thought, dismissing the woman from the woman. He stayed at his spot, mind glued to the thought of someone telling Fleur she could not have this dress. A smile of amusement graced his lips, but, like everything else, he kept himself in check and proceeded to the elevator. He still had a delivery to make. "What took you so long?" Foxface questioned, taking the garment from his hands. Cedric shrugged as he grabbed the couch for himself. It's a long story, but you're welcome, he replied. Foxface almost stumbled in her footing as she was briskly making her exit from the room. Excuse me? She asked. You're welcome, Cedric repeated. He looked up from the television and at her instead. He pointed at the clothing in her hand before saying it again. You are welcome. Foxface sighed as she shook her head. She couldn't believe she had stopped to give him more of her time. Ever since their night talk, she had found herself doing it more often than she desired. Besides, she thought, I could have gotten it by myself. Oh, sorry. Foxface jumped as she lightly bumped into another person in the hallway. She looked up to see that it was the other District 12 tribute. Harry Popper? No, Harry Potter, she said sternly. The said glass-eyed boy nodded his head as he stepped to the side. He was already running late for his interview practice with Haymitch and Katniss. He didn't want to add another trouble to his growing list. I'm really sorry. I should have looked at where I was going. He apologized again. Foxface shrugged, indifferent to the situation, and just continued on her way out. Meanwhile, Harry sighed as he too continued to walk towards his destination. If her actions towards him were indifferent before, he was pretty sure that now, she had a better reason to kill him because of their run-in. Cedric watched interestedly as he watched his mentor, Jack, tinker with the coffee machine in the little kitchen. When they had been sent into their temporary home, the capital expected the tributes and mentors to be training and discussing survival tactics and whatnot. They would have never expected them to be cooking in a kitchen, but, as if to not completely dismiss that possibility, provided every living space a small one. Darn, this thing just won't work, will it? Jack mused to himself. He hit the top of the machine with his fist, and in return, its lights flickered. Jack sighed and returned to where Cedric was. Guess we won't have coffee today, mate, he said. Cedric shrugged. It's all right. We can manage, or well, he flashed his mentor a quizzical smile. I can manage. Jack chuckled but gave him a threatening look in unison. Yeah, I can manage for a few minutes. But that's not the point. We have to talk about your interview. So, you got any ideas? He asked. Aren't you supposed to be the one supplying those? Cedric countered. Only when my life is in danger, mate, laughed Jack. Cedric just remained stoic at that comment. He had been kind of expecting his reaction from Jack, seeing that the former champion had not bothered to tamper with his nor Foxface affairs till now. And even then, he only gave them the rarest of tips and such. It was as if Jack thought that this was all a joke, a game. Jack, Cedric murmured, calling him out of his reverie. Jack looked at him. If I go down, you... No. Stop the threat, mate. I know you ain't got the guts to go through with it. It's just not your best skill, per se. Jack cut off. Cedric raised an eyebrow. It's not? How would you know? Simple. I'm an insightful person. Based on your actions and words, I can tell how you would normally react to almost any situation at all. He replied. You're lying. Try me. I'd rather not. What? Jack blinked as his mind retraced the origins of their conversation whilst Cedric laughed. Looks like you don't know all my reactions to certain situations, Jack. So stop kidding around and lend me a hand here. I'm admittedly, he sighed, lost. That would be unfair though, mate. I haven't lent a hand to your partner yet either. Jack pointed out. You can give one to her later, and if not, you could be called a cheater possessive, keeping my intellect all to yourself. Jack said, I am not. It's you who is doing that. Come on, Jack. Do you want us to just drop out as flukes? Cedric pleaded. Jack paused for a second, and Cedric seriously thought he would leave him and Foxface to face the interview without any tips or help at all. Hey, I know. I'll just give you a tip. Yes? Cedric shrugged. A tip was a tip, and if that was all he had to work with, then by gods, he would work with it. All right, mate. My tip. Well, it's simple actually. My only tip is, utilize what you already have. Now, if you excuse me, he glanced at the pondering Cedric quietly. I must make my coffee. Ta-da for now, mate, he said. Foxface stared at the wall-length mirror appeased. She twirled around in her newly acquired dress and watched as it shimmered with her bright, ribbon-like hair. Her stylist had done an amazing job, and she was confident that despite her silent and cat-like attributes, she would turn heads and attract attention like that Katniss girl. I wonder what would Cedric say, she thought. Earlier, she had an idea that if they coordinated with each the other's apparel, that they would gather as much sponsors as they could. It would be like they were playing out an unrequited love sort of theme-fooling yet benefiting for her and Cedric. Although, she had to admit that she had let the idea slip more than once to the stylists already. So if she didn't even propose it to him, they would have already sorted out this plan by themselves. And when that occurred, she wouldn't have to worry about a possibly angry Cedric. Lovely. Quite lovely. Dear? Foxface turned around to meet the head stylist. She hadn't talked to him much, but that was simply because of his and the others' accents. It was all so irritating and strange she just couldn't handle all of it at the same time. Yes? She asked. This fell from the tagging of your dress. It's a note from what I gather. He drawled, handing her a very crumpled up piece of paper. Foxface took it into her hands and read the message thoroughly. It was plain and simple, short too, in summary. But what confused her the most was, why does he want to meet up with me? Cedric frowned at this newest revelation, and it just goes to say that Fleur wasn't the least bit pleased either. She had just recently relayed to Cedric that Crumb had taken to furthering his training for the interview. It pleased the both to hear that he was finally taking things into account, but they also didn't like how it took him away from their plotting sessions. But not the only that, I was denied a dress, Fleur exclaimed, practically raising a storm around her. Cedric shied off to one side of the rooftop for protection, and to get his own thoughts together. He sighed. We'll just have to make do without him, he said. Fleur frowned, and Airy, we haven't heard from the boy in decades. It's only been 2 days, Fleur. Cedric pointed out. Exactly. Decades, Cedric sighed. Honestly, he cared for Fleur, and had the patience to deal with her in the past, but now? He was slowly losing it without Crumb to add his 2 cents in and alter the conversation into a different topic. His head, along with Fleur's, shot up at the sound of someone approaching. When the lights finally revealed who it was, Fleur scowled, and Cedric just sat there with his mouth agape. Am I disturbing something? Foxface asked. Pax promises. Crashing Mirth, your review made me pretty happy, and just because of that, I'll make sure to remind myself that Harry and Katniss need more appearances in this fanfiction. Well, of course they do, since they are the main characters. Nervous face anyway. As for the review thingy, well, as long as people read, I'll be content. Thank you for sticking through with this. These violent delights have violent ends. Shakespeare. His hands were clammy, and as he glanced at Katniss, he wondered if they could truly pull it off together. Besides that, he also had to face the problem of escaping this place. He didn't belong here, yet he was making plans and giving hope to a girl he barely knew. Whether he was doing the right thing or not, frankly, he wasn't quite sure what he was doing. You okay there, Harry? Katniss asked quietly. She took a daring glance at him, as if to not attract any undesired attention towards their conversation. Harry nodded all but too quickly and excused himself from the table. After tomorrow, they would be facing the real interview with no help whatsoever from Haymitch. That fact didn't sit right with his stomach, as he knew he would totally screw it all up. Harry left them, and as he dashed towards the elevator, he knew that someone was following him. Undoubtedly, it was probably Katniss, but Harry didn't have the heart not time to check. He pressed on the elevator's buttons, and prayed to some unknown deity that the door would just close. Harry. SWIP. Harry slumped against the cool metal in relief. He had barely escaped an interrogation stampede, and he was happy that he had. His brown eyes slid towards the buttons again, and landed on a bright double-digit one. He would be going to the very top of the rooftop. Sorry, Katniss, he thought, regaining his composure. Harry could only wait for the doors to once again slide open before making another run for it. It was true he planned to escape. He planned to get out the darn building now before all was too late. And in the back of his mind, he knew what he was doing was wrong. But his emotions justified his thoughts and told me that he wasn't what the others thought he was strong. Letting out a heavy sigh, Harry exited the tightly closed area and greeted the night air in one inhale. The cold air chilled his lungs and soothed his burning mind. It was perfect, and tonight, He would be entitled to this for the rest of his life. Harry, the moment of tranquility ended there. Harry looked up to see Cedric looking at him, a hidden alleviation dancing behind his warm eyes. Beside him, a tiny yet familiar woman emerged. Fleur. She clasped her hands together and brought them to her face. She appeared happy to see him, and then Harry stared at the unknown girl on the other side of Cedric. She had blinding red hair and almost reminded him of Ginny, his best friend's little sister. "Hello there, Cedric," he greeted, stepping closer to the group. Cedric smiled in reply as Fleur hugged him tightly. Ever since Harry had rescued her sister, Fleur had grown a strong fondness about him. He didn't know what to feel about that just yet. "Oh, I am glad you have finally made it. If only Victor were here, well," she pouted, letting him go. Harry nodded a little and extended a hand out for Cedric to shake. They did, and when Cedric finally let go, he looked over at the redhead next to him. "Harry, this is the other tribute from my district, Foxface," he introduced. The said boy didn't know whether to believe the Hufflepuff or not. Foxface? He wondered if that truly was her name, and so he looked at her for confirmation, but she offered nothing but silence. "It's nice to meet you, Foxface," he said. She nodded, likewise. Fleur coughed. "Now if you don't mind, we have some important things to discuss." Foxface's apathetic expression turned hostile as her eyes turned to slits. The boys on the sidelines made notice of this and found that her nickname, or name as Harry thought it really was very fitting. "Such as what? To plan an escape?" she questioned. "Without you, yes." "Ouch," Cedric murmured, and began to hesitate on whether he should continue with his silence. His partner glared at the French girl. She edged closer to her white-appareled frame, and easily proved that her height was nothing to be overlooked. For even if Fleur was taller than her, Foxface's anger seemed to make up for the small difference in inches. "Listen you," she began. Girls?" Cedric quietly motioned for Harry to go and restrain his partner while he crept around Fleur's back. "I've had enough with you arrogance. Not only did you try and steal my dress," she shot Cedric an accusing glare at this, "but you're plotting behind everyone's backs. You think Harry?" The upcoming fight was settled there. Harry paused midway in trying to pull Foxface away from Fleur, as Cedric looked at the newcomer questioningly. "Harry?" Katniss said again. Was she seeing things right? Was Harry about to go and hug that girl? Katniss frowned as she stepped back from the quartet. For all she knew, she could have barged in to one of their last dates together. Katniss sighed as this new sadness overcame her. She was probably assuming things, since the two weren't even in the same district, but couldn't help but feel betrayed. Harry let his arms drop to his sides as he remained silent. Cedric noted that the glass-eyed boy would not make an attempt to clear himself up, and decided to take that matter upon his hands. He stepped forward with his boyish smile. Katniss Everdeen, correct? Harry here was just, "No, I have to go," she mumbled and ran off. Cedric sighed and turned to Harry. He was about to tell him to go after her, but Foxface cut him off as she stormed past him. Her shoulder bumped into him really hard as she did so, and Cedric had to waste a second or two regaining his balance. Meanwhile, Fleur had the look of victory written all over her pretty face. She crossed her arms across her chest and scoffed. "Girls," she murmured, following the other two's paths in suit. "We will continue this tomorrow night, yes?" she called out, just before she left their sight. Cedric nodded his head. Fleur smiled. "Yes. Well, good night, Cedric." "Harry." The two boys blinked. Cedric fell into a crouch as he pondered over the recent events. Harry clutched his head in confusion, and the city lights seemed to torment them with the beauties that had just left their worlds shaken. "Merlin's beard," Cedric muttered. He looked up at Harry. "What just happened?" he asked. Harry shrugged his shoulders. "I dunno, mate. I don't know." Krum could not believe his mentor. Multiple times she had tried to fight him, but for what reason? He did not know nor desired to find out. So he headed out of their section of the building and wandered astray into other parts of it. His mind was flooding with thoughts and tactics, but mostly the dreaded what-ifs. What if they couldn't make it out in time? What if they all died? What if one of them got left behind? And most importantly, what if they couldn't go home at all? Crumb frowned at this latest thought and sauntered through the hallway with the grace he lacked on ground. He sorely missed his broom and the game he valiantly trained for. He sighed and murmured some words in his home language. He had to stop thinking, or Victor. The said man stopped dead in his tracks. His small beady eyes flashed at the person in front of viciously as he barely contained the anger that the boy had instilled in him since their first meeting. Cato smirked and pushed himself off the wall. He walked towards Victor and around at him as well, the smirk never leaving his self-assured face. You look better now, Cato commented, settling his body in front of him. Victor did not reply and Simple tried to go past him. Cato did not have any of it as his arm shot out to stop him. The blond boy shook his head in displeasure. TSK, TSK, TSK. Now listen, Victor, I know we may have gotten on the wrong foot, and I apologize for that. What I want to do right now is make a proposition for you, he began. Victor raised one thick eyebrow. Ave no interest, he said gruffly. Cato chuckled. Well, too bad, you have to listen or else. And if not? Now, Victor, we wouldn't want a repeat of last time, now do we? Victor's face darkened at this. He could still clearly remember the force behind all the boy's punches. Cato was a force to be reckoned with. The boy had left Victor sore for 2 days at most with them. Guess not. So listen, I have a deal and a plan that me and the others want you in on. Cato began. Others? Asked Victor. Cato nodded. Yes, others. Now, as far as I know, you want to survive all this, don't you? So why don't you work together with us and the rest of the careers to heighten your chances of survival? Of course, he raised a hand to stop another one of Crumb's questions. When the time is right, we will disperse into a one-man army when we will be the ones left over. So you in? He asked. No. Crumb answered. He knew that if he and the others did not escape before the day after tomorrow, that they would be screwed. They would be stuck in the arena and would have to deal with surviving and trying to stay low from the cameras set all around the place. And besides, if they were to be sent into the arena, Crumb would have preferred to kill his enemies rather than his friends, not vice versa. I see, Cato murmured, leaning against the wall again. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I guess I can't change your mind. Unless, his smirk returned. Unless I tell you that your plans to escape are useless. Because face it, Victor, Cato said his name in a tone as to provoke the other man. We know your group won't succeed, and I have something of yours. It was dark, and the fog was back, but in the shape of a giant old monster. It was as if his childhood nightmares had come back to life and were haunting him again, wanting to kill him. The little boy who was dreaming all of this screamed for help as he stumbled along the green carpeted floor. Roots below him sprung to life as they clawed for the boy's stick-thick ankles. They tried to trip him as well, but all their attempts were futile. A woman's voice called out at him. The little boy wanted so dearly to unite with the owner of it. He was scared and alone. The fog was catching up to him. Someone, he cried. Help, Katniss. Ashu? Katniss shot up from her bed, wiping the cold sweat on her forehead with her sleeve. She stared into a looking glass, where brown eyes clashed with hers. Harry. Katniss's mouth formed a thin line. She decided to ignore his concern and looked around her. She was in her room, so why was the boy in it as well? Was her nightmare that bad? Had he come to wake her? Or did she call him in her sleep? Katniss, Harry called out again. The girl looked at him with a hardened gaze. Harry wanted to flinch, but knew he deserved this treatment. He sighed. Katniss, about last night, he began. He didn't want to stir up bad memories, but he had to clear his name up. It was the only way of ensuring their trust and to lighten the bad news he would have to deliver afterward. No, Harry. Last night, it was a mistake. Whatever you were doing, I don't care nor want to find out. It's your life, and I overreacted. Okay, Katniss said. She too wanted to make amends, but with a conflicting heart and mind, it was proving to be tough. Harry shook his head, but was glad to hear those words. All right, those weren't the words Katniss wanted to hear, but this was Harry, and he was oblivious to what she wanted. But Katniss? he said again. Yeah, Harry, I decided to do practice with Haymitch alone today and am planning to do the same thing tomorrow. You overslept anyway, so I hope you understand what I'm trying to do. He sighed. Katniss restrained herself from rolling her eyes. Instead, she merely kept her opinions to herself. She would fake it now at this point. Don't worry, I understand, Harry. You just want to win this all by yourself. Harry smiled at her. I knew you would. Well, I just came up to check if you were awake and tell you that. So I guess I'll be leaving. I'll see you around, Katniss. Although, even if he had closed the door after him, it did not stop Katniss from muttering her last sets of words. And the same to you, Harry. I hope you know what you're doing. May the odds be ever in your favor. Don't think I said this, but with new quotes means a new part of the fanfic. When the cradle breaks, things and will answer a growing question I've been receiving. Now I haven't much to say but enjoy, happy face. The next day proceeded in an awkward state. Many tributes and rooms were filled with unrequited words whilst tension steamed out in hazy fogs from certain places. More especially as the big interview loomed over all of them in a tormenting fashion, girls scurried to tie up the last ends of their dresses and words, practicing answers and using their unique charms that would inevitably claim hearts of some, if not all, viewers. Meanwhile, boys would brush up on their manners and looks. Sure, most had refused to give much thought into their clothes, but then again, they were boys, right? Most of them were self-assured that their good looks would pull through in any outfit their dressers would present them in. So with that said, they basically had the most time on their hands compared to everybody else. This fact certainly pulled true to one certain tribute, Cedric Diggory. Honestly, the said boy paused as he tried to recall her name. But to no avail, the information refused to arise in his head. He sighed and continued on. You can't go on forever without speaking to me. He finished. Foxface's hair almost whipped him as she fiercely turned around. There was an unsaid fire flitting behind her eyes as she shooed the crew away. Her mouth was about to open, and before she could say a word, forced it closed again. Cedric sighed. Really? Don't tease me like that. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. If anything, I could be plotting on how to overtake you during the games. But no, instead, I'm trying to make peace with you. So please at least meet me a teeny bit halfway here. His eyes showed exasperation, but he quickly learned to accept the silent treatment for now and watched her stare at the mirror. His partner, Foxface, examined her reflection. She was determined to ignore Cedric today and focus on her appearance. Her hair was perfectly curled around her slender face, framing and garnering all attention to it, meaning the only problem she currently faced now was the bareness it represented. Now, in all her years of hard work and struggle, Foxface had never yet once touched an inkling of makeup. The presentation of the games had changed that for her. Now, sorted into groups, every color and piece of makeup lay in front of her. Foxface had everything that she could and couldn't have dreamed of. Oh, doing your own makeup, I see. I say don't go for the bright colors. They'll clash with your hair. Cedric offhandedly advised. Amused, he watched as her fingers hurriedly danced away from the golds. The boy chuckled at this as Foxface looked at him with sharpened eyes. He was sure that they had once secretly been knives in the past. What? I'm only trying to. He never got to finish his sentence. Cedric's eyes had focused on an object undoubtedly flying towards him, and he had ducked in order to dodge it. Hesitantly, he rose back up again and stared at Foxface warily. He noticed her hand reaching for another bright color. He let out a nervous chuckle. I think I'll go now, he murmured, making an urgent retreat for the door. Only when did it silently click close again did Foxface let out a relieved sigh. She gathered the eyeliner she threw at him and stowed it back to its original place. Why is he so insistent on things? She thought, picking up a dark brown liquid eyeliner. She put it against her eyes and decided that it would suit her and her dress nicely. Can't he see that we're all going to die? And that was only one example of the disquieting feelings seeping throughout the rooms. Another set flourished from the floor above as others continued to worsen below. Fleur had not gotten a good night's rest last night. Instead, she had fumbled with her sheets and tried to force herself to sleep. The only thing she received in return for that were visions of nightmares that would devour her if she indeed had fallen into slumber. So she marched through the day in a silent rage. Her emotions were pounding against the glass case she had stored them in, and demanded release. But they were given none. Fleur was only set on two negative beings that day, worry and fear. Because for one, she hadn't seen Crumb since lunch of yesterday, and two, they were still in the bloody world, and the only one capable of preforming magic in their group was Cedric, and even he had found difficulty with doing one simple spell as well. Fleur sighed as she finally receded with her fidgeting. Her makeup was being done, and the people doing it were slowly becoming irritated with her constant moving. And although they knew they couldn't blame her, they just wanted to get their work done right and quick. Does Lilibeth know? Fleur thought of her mentor. An image of the spunky woman sparked in her head before disappearing in a breath of smoke. It was nearly impossible for her to get the woman to treat her well and seriously. But then again, Crumb's life was on the line here, and she had shown that she favored the towering giant more than her. So, there was a slight chance in getting help from Lilibeth. "Excuse me," she pardoned, grabbing everyone's attention. "But, have any of you seen Victor?" she asked. Almost instantly, everyone shook their heads. Everyone except for the hairdresser. Fleur looked at her imploringly, hoping for some hint or answer about his location. "He's with Lilibeth, they're training," she answered nonchalantly. Fleur made a soft noise of approval, but in the depths of her mind, knew that that was highly unlikely to happen. Crumb despised their mentor for obvious reasons. One was for Lilibeth had almost killed him. Fleur sighed as she shifted in her seat, the people around her casting her annoyed glares. "Please, miss, just 2 more minutes," one of them said, displeased. Fleur felt blood rushing to her cheeks. These were one of the rarest moments in her life that she felt embarrassed. "Sorry," she mumbled. Cato was not a person to be taken lightly. Glimmer had found this out the hard way. As the two crossed the stage and welcomed their fated death together, she had made the mistake to challenge him. Cato, as charming as he was, did not take her challenge lightly. Like her, he wanted to survive, and he understood that even though they were bound to assist each other in the beginning of the games, he would have to kill her in the end. "So he agreed?" she asked quietly, careful not to arouse the attention of their mentor. Having been from one of the better-off districts, they were fitter, yet more stricter with how they would claim their victory. Their mentor in particular had obsessed this subject to them countless of times. And as Glimmer carefully watched him catch some sleep, she wondered if the man ever thought about anything else. "He's still thinking, but I think we've got him." Well, Cato flashed her one of his trademark smirks. He reached inside his pocket and produced an elaborate, smooth, stick-like object from it. "As long as I have this, I know he won't refuse us." Glimmer smiled in agreement. "True, and I just can't wait to get rid of his fellow tribute." Cato chuckled. "Jealous? Are you?"
No.
Cato shrugged, and truthfully he wasn't. He did not care for the foreign beauty, as the capital had dubbed her. He thought that she was just a mere weak link to Crumb, and would be a fun prey to toy with towards the end of the games given, if she was even still alive at that time. His mouth compressed into a thin line as he pushed himself away from the table. "I'm gonna go grab some shut, I might be a while till I get any after tomorrow," he added, leaving the room. Glimmer nodded to herself, easily dismissing Cato's presence. She was too submerged in her own worries. After the interviews were the games itself. When that occurred, there would be no more time to lounge around, hold quiet talks with Cato, and enjoy what little time she had in Panem. Worse, she knew that after eliminating at least half of the tributes, their career group would break apart, and she would be left to deal with everybody else alone. And Glimmer knew what the others did too. She was an easy kill. Surely, everyone would go after her first, seeing that she would almost put up to no hassle at all in her state. She was well educated in survival tactics and fighting, but she feared that if a boy got to her it would be the end of her life. She was doomed. Poison. Glimmer nearly jumped out of her seat. She threw a look at her mentor, and watched his chest rise and fall with each breath. He had been a champion. He had killed everyone that was thrown in the arena with him. Glimmer gulped. She wondered if she had enough willpower to do the same. Her mentor was shifting in his position. He would awaken soon. Poison. Glimmer narrowed her eyes at him. She couldn't exactly recall the games he had been a part of, but she was sure that he hadn't used nor experienced the usage of poison, although toxins as that could surely provide an upper hand. "What are you staring at?" the mentor and peeked at her through half-lidded eyes. Glimmer remained subdued in her thoughts as she watched her mentor grumble and turn away from her. Poison. Well, it was a pretty interesting topic in her opinion. Harry sighed as he cleaned his glasses yet again. Haymitch has insisted upon taking their lesson to the little kitchen the capital provided. And currently he was steaming water. To clear your lungs, he had said. Harry wanted to scoff at that. The only thing that the vapor did was fog his glasses and blind him. Stop. Haymitch mumbled, irked. He had enough with watching the boy fumble with his spectacles. Harry grumbled something under his breath as he stowed them back on his head. He watched as Haymitch chewed on a stick of celery. And as strange as it appeared, the man had claimed that it was either that or he took out his bottle of booze. Harry preferred Haymitch sober rather than puking all over the tiled floor. Sorry, couldn't help it. Can we continue now? Harry asked, eager to get his session done. The two had gone through 2 hours of perpetual practice and preparation. He was confident that if Katniss was here, she would be proud of the plan that he had proposed. The two would finally settle on better terms and ensure a better survival. He sighed. That was another thing. Ever since he told Katniss of his decision, she had avoided him like a plague. She pierced him with her silence and indifferent glances. Harry was not a fool. He knew he had done something wrong, but as to what he had done, the answer escaped him. Crack. Again, Harry was reminded of the tribute practicing his fighting on their first day of training. Discreetly, he had spied on the blonde boy crushing the dummies with his bare fists. The guy had been merciless and relentless with his attacks. There had been nights that Harry had dreamed of him being one of those dummies. He'd wake up, soaked in sweat, and try to purchase sleep again in futile efforts. Harry cringed as Haymitch crunched another stalk of celery with his teeth. The tribute. He could easily make Harry's bones snap like that. You listening? Harry blinked before shaking his head. He had been too immersed in his thoughts to pay attention to Haymitch. The said man harumphed in response. I said that we're done. If you stay as awkward as you are and bring on a pity story, you'll have the crowd in hysterics and tears. Haymitch repeated in arrogance. The glass-eyed boy shrugged. It was just like his old life in a way. He had gained most of his recognition through his disastrous experience and depressing childhood. Truly, if Harry had not had those events happen to him, he would have been a different boy. Still awkward, perhaps. Happier? Definitely. Oh, and Harry? The boy halted in his departure and curiously watched as Haymitch looked around in secrecy. He beckoned the boy to come closer and Harry meekly obeyed. Did anything happen between you and Katniss? He asked. Harry quirked an eyebrow. He wondered what could have compelled the man to ask him such a question. But then again, his thoughts retraced to Katniss's past behavior. Had Haymitch noticed it too? Harry decided that he would be better off answering truthfully. To be frank, I don't know. He answered. Haymitch nodded grimly and shooed him off. It would appear that he would have to investigate on his own. Oh, sorry. Harry apologized, bumping into one of those Avoxes. His eyes sparked with intrigue as he watched the girl bow her head to him in what appeared to be shame. She seemed to ignore his apology as she continued on her way. Wait, Harry called out, reaching out for her. The Avox visibly cringed as his hand curled around her arm, and she slowly turned around to meet him again. Harry gladly let her go at this point, and let his hand sheepishly rub the back of his head. Do you have any medicine? To relieve a headache or something? He asked. The Avox girl blinked at him for a few moments, as if swallowing his request before nodding her head. She put up her hand, all 5 fingers splayed out, before scurrying away. Harry did not understand her gesture, and therefore thought that she had left him. Sighing, he headed to the bathroom to contemplate. Excuse me. Katniss had not been expecting to bump into Harry. She had simply gone into the bathroom to wash herself up for her session with Haymitch, and hopefully avoid her fellow District 12 tribute. She stepped to the side and around him. Also, conscious at the fact that Harry was evidently staring at her, she kept her head low. Katniss, the girl did not listen. Instead, she just mumbled her apology again before dashing for safety. She couldn't lie to him nor herself. Things between them had grown tense and unusual. Katniss could practically run an arrow through the air at the dinner table when they ate together. It was as if that small bond they had formed disappeared. But she really couldn't blame it on anyone else but herself. She was the one who had consistently pushed Harry away, while on the other hand, the boy lived life on thinking he had done nothing wrong. He was oblivious to Katniss's reason for acting so strange. Or so she hoped. Harry was alerted back to reality as the Avox girl reacquainted with him again. In her palm, she held a tiny transparent bottle of what seemed to be medicine pills. Harry gladly took it and entered the bathroom. He made a beeline for the porcelain sink and pushed the cold water faucet at max. The water burst out almost instantaneously like a waterfall. Harry sighed and dove his hands into the icy water. Next, he slid his glasses off before splashing his face with the strong liquid. The water hit him like cold bricks and Harry was instantly awake again. He turned the faucet again and grabbed the bottle of medicine. Ron. It was no secret he thought about his friends often. Homesickness had devoured him a long time ago, and he had constantly yearned for their presence each night. He questioned on whether if the others felt the same way, but realized that they were different from him. They were more mature and handled these situations easily. Their longing was probably less than half the amount that he felt it at, although that wasn't the only thing that bothered him. His eyes. They weren't their original color anymore. The same went for his scar. It was fading into his skin and was becoming more and more harder to spot as the days flew by. His appearance was changing and he didn't even know why. Was this happening to the others too? Harry fretted over this change since he discovered it and fumbled with the bottle in his hand. Thinking had given him a headache. You two have been playing for ages, Harry. I'm sure this game can wait while you do your homework. Reprimanded Hermione. She hovered over the table Harry and Ron occupied, a book tightly clutched against her chest. Just 5 more minutes, Hermione. Ron said offhandedly. He moved his bishop closer to one of Harry's last remaining pawns. I hope you're ready to lose, Harry. He grinned. Harry scoffed as he ordered his queen to deliver a quick and easy blow to the trespasser. In your dreams. He smirked. Hermione rolled her eyes and resisted the temptation to slam her book down on the pieces. No, instead, she gruffly grunted and tried to make them see that doing their homework would be the best idea right now. Sorry, Hermione. I'm not touching one quill till I finish him, said Ron. Likewise, agreed Harry, happily watching as his pawn escaped one of Ron's pieces' attack. He was about to taunt Ron over this accomplishment before his head pulsated in pain. Hand quickly covering his scar, both Ron and Hermione snapped to attention. You okay, Harry? The girl asked. I wish, he mumbled, taking one pill and swallowing it whole. He grimaced at the bitter taste, but shrugged it off in a few seconds afterward. He'd dealt with worse, he could deal with this. Author's reply section, crashing mirth. And you, my dear reader, are easily becoming one of my favorite reviewers. Nervous face again, thanks for the review and I agree. I look forward to seeing where their interactions will lead to. And as for the dreams, well, you'll probably be surprised to see what they translate into. Although, you won't find the translations till later on in the story. Smiley face. FT. I never took you to be a fictional reader, but oh well, you learn something new each day, right? Nervous face. Wow. I feel really honored to have gotten your attention. I mean, to have one of my favorite authors here read my work is just a blessing. Thank you for your reviews and input. Ella, actually, there is a reason for his eyes to be brown. I just haven't gotten to explaining it yet. Nervous face. Oh, and you're welcome. And thanks for reading. Splack 13. Difficult crossover section? Well, if the author is writing for comedy, then I would like to differ. But oh well. Thanks for the comment and review. And reading. Nervous face, you guys are seriously making me so happy. And yeah, Fleur and Crumb really want their wands back. They've gone to the extent of threatening me to write it in. But I haven't given in yet. As for Harry's eyes? Well, yes. His eyes are brown for a good reason. A maddening choice. Fools rush in where even angels fear to tread. Alexander Pope. The tides were churning and crashing against formidable rocks. The sun was setting, and the news was just becoming more like a faint lie. Slowly, students began their lethargic descent from their seats. Parents were merely left with shock whilst friends tried to swim against the flood of worry. The contestants were gone. They all thought, couldn't be, Ron. Hermione was finally able to push against the mass of people and stumble to his side. She wrapped her arms around his and led them aside the sea of bumbling people. Harry, she breathed out, exhausted from fighting against everyone. We have to find him. Ron shook his head and pried his arm away from her grasp. He shooed their other friends that were trying to get closer and looked at her hard in the eye. Conceal it as much as she would like. He could see the darkness threatening to envelope her being. Hermione, we can't. You heard Dumbledore. They're gone. Poof. Disappeared, he said. But we've got to try at least. Hermione protested. She refused to sit and wait for the Ministry to find their friends. Who knew how long they would take? Ron heaved out a sigh. He knew he was fighting a lost battle, but he had to try. The war wasn't over yet. Tomorrow, said Ron. Tomorrow what? We'll start looking for him tomorrow. Today we rest. We already spent most of the day standing here not eating. We can afford the wait a day. He clarified. And what if Harry's in danger? Hermione crossed her arms. He's got Krum, Hermione. The said girl sighed. She had to give him that. If Harry had Krum, then they would surely be fine together. Krum was a tough guy. It would at least take a surprise attack to take him down. And Merlin only knew when the guy let his guard down. Oh, fine. She conceded, her eyes tracing over the maze again. Like many, she still couldn't grasp how they could have disappeared without any of the adults knowing. Everyone was under a watchful eye, or so she had thought. Ron. Hermione exclaimed again, grabbing his arm. Ron sighed and rubbed his ear. Bloody heck, Hermione. What is it? Now, scarf and all. Hermione shot him a glare as she ran past the stragglers of the audience and towards one of the entrances of the maze. Bending down, she picked up a wand. It was dark brown, its handle smooth. She carefully rose to her feet and showed it to Ron. This is Harry's wand, she stated. Ron frowned. He couldn't believe that. Harry would have never abandoned his wand. Let me see that, he grumbled. He let the wooden object roll around his palm before giving it back to Hermione. Well? The girl asked. But before her red-haired friend couple reply, two identical brothers swung their way into the scene. In two, they dragged a disgruntled Ginny and a dazed-looking blonde. Ron frowned at their appearance and left without another word. He had shot Hermione a look, as if to say that she should follow him, but the girl just shunned him away. Hello there, Hermione. Ginny greeted, pulling her arm back to her side. George or Fred? Hermione wasn't quite sure which one was which yet. Merely gave her a grin in reply to her haughtiness. Hello, Ginny, and Hermione watched as the blonde beside her smiled pleasantly at their surroundings. The twins had followed her gaze and sniggered quietly to themselves. Ginny glared at them before she returned her attention to the girl in front of her. Luna. She's Luna Lovegood, a close friend of mine. And Luna? This Hermione Granger, one of my brother's friends. Ginny introduced. The said girl neatly bowed her head at Hermione in greeting. It's nice to meet you, she said. Hermione smiled back. As to you the same. All right, now that introductions have been made, George, or Fred, began. Let us go on to more pressing matters. The other cut off. As for one, Harry and pretty boy's whereabouts. Hermione raised a delicate eyebrow. The twins, although having shown their concern for them from time to time, had never bothered to offer help with their situations at all. For them to start now was a bit suspicious for the smart Gryffindor. That's strange. You two never usually help us, Hermione pointed out. Ginny nodded in agreement. Well, you've never given us the chance, Fred exclaimed in a jolly tone. Yeah, you and Ronnykins always keep the good stuff to yourselves. So how could we have ever helped? George questioned. Hermione only sighed in retort. The twin did have a good point there. But still, she could not get it past her brain that the twins were willing to get dirty and help her and Ron out. Ginny seemed to agree with this as she crossed her arms across her chest. They made a bet with a Durmstrang student, if you must know, she said. The twins frowned at this. Why, Ginny? How could you? They said, clearly hurt by the accusation. Luna smiled at this as she recalled the conversation the two had overheard earlier. Indeed, it's true. Ginny and I were right by them when they made the bet. It's quite useless, though, if you ask me. I think Luna, Ginny stressed out her name. Why don't you head back inside? I'll be right behind you in a minute, she suggested. She didn't want her friend rambling on about some other fictional entity in front of Hermione. That would be an argument saved for later on. Luna nodded her head and bid the rest of them farewell. It was nice meeting you, Hermione, she said. Finally, Fred snickered, leaning on his brother for support. Thought you'd never get rid of that crazy Ravenclaw, George concluded. A chilling wind momentarily encased them as Ginny finished fixing her scarf. Don't you say that about Luna. She is perfectly sane. It's you two who aren't. She huffed before following her blonde friend's trail out. The twins laughed at her retreating back. Fred? George? Crazy? They grinned to themselves. Now that's complete madness. They hollered. Hermione rolled her eyes at them. She knew they were only trying to lighten the dreading mood, but their bluntness was not really required to do that. Luna, in her opinion, was a nice young girl. She seemed fairly normal, but then again, she had just met her. Luna could have been hiding some strange antics in that short 10-minute meeting they had. Again, Hermione sighed to herself as she let the twins rope her back into the castle. Her thoughts finally swayed back to her friend's predicament, and she hoped that wherever he was safe. Harry, I've been waiting for you, the voice hissed. There were two paths laid out in front of him, none looking at all inviting. One was flanked with gray stone walls, while the other was surrounded by thick trees with cruelly shaped branches. Harry, should he go, or should he stay? Which path should he take? The main one. Ashu? Harry looked around him and only saw Katniss sporting a beautiful radiant dress. She was captivating, but the thin line on her mouth was enough to snap him out of his about-to-be reverie of her. He raised an eyebrow. It's your turn, Harry. We're doing the interviews, remember? She whispered to him. The pair of tributes behind them hid their laughs between coughs. Katniss's face scrunched up as she glanced at him before looking back at Harry. Come on, go Harry, she said urgently. Harry, finally composed, nodded his head and stuttered out his seat. Once he was on the pathway to the stage, he readjusted his tie before marching up with all the elegance and grace he could muster. Think Fleur, he thought as he passed by her. The woman only offered a brief smile in recognition before turning back to the screen the camera had taken to doing a full sweep of the audience before it landed on her. Her peculiar interview sung of charm and inconspicuous flirtatious comments, and thus gained her a lot of popularity among viewers nationwide. Harry gulped as he finally stood by Caesar Flickerman. The two gave quick introductions before jumping into an interrogation round. In a way, he was successfully pulling it off with his sarcastic comments and fast replies. Twice, Caesar had asked him about his unique accent twice. Harry laughed it off and offered a new topic to converse about. The crowd was slowly forgetting his delayed appearance. Well, Harry, got anyone at home? A girlfriend you might want to say hi to? Caesar casually asked. Harry momentarily faltered with his words. No, he said truthfully. Caesar appeared to be surprised. Why, you must be lying, right? A handsome boy as you should have a girl you love back home. He pressed on. I wish, he mumbled, but the mic on him picked it up and broadcasted it to the crowd. Some laughed while others merely smiled. But I have someone. His eyes traveled to the lavishly dressed people before him. Caesar did not fail to catch his action. Are they watching right now? He asked. Yes. What's their name, Harry? Caesar leaned in and questioned. The whole audience silenced down as they awaited his answer. And for a brief moment, Harry was reminded of his interview with that pesky Rita Skeeter. She had been prying him open for information in the past, and Caesar's way of interrogating was anything but a different style from hers. Harry closed his eyes and faltered on his next set of words. He could tell them the truth, but the person who currently held his heart wasn't even in the crowd nor the living in this particular world right now. So he held his breath and prayed to whatever deity that was out there, that the name he would utter would not ruin the rest of his chances of staying alive. Her name is beautiful, charming. I love it. Caesar laughed. His blue lips pursed together as he tried to compose himself, but just like the crowd, his mouth refused to cooperate. Fleur beamed and basked in her soul limelight, but at the same time, she did a quick survey of everyone in attendance. Her eyes landed on Krum, and for a brief second, they held each other's gaze. Something is not erged, she thought, inconspicuously keeping her eye out on him. Krum had been acting weird since his return a night ago. He didn't talk to her, and he refused to let anyone near him, besides the prep team. Their mentor, as well, had even given up on Krum for his incredulous behavior. Now, I'm sure I'm speaking the truth when I ask this. Do you have a special someone back home? Pressed Caesar. Fleur smiled and nodded her head. At the corner of her eye, she saw Cato quietly smirking to himself as he had flashed a glance at Krum. Perhaps not a special someone, but a someone that I secretly love. Fleur led on. Caesar's eyebrows shot up in pure interest. And who is that, my lovely dear? Fleur paused to add suspense in the air. Her eyes had met Krum's again, and they hardened at their meeting. Discreetly, he was sacking something into his tux's pocket. Fleur instantly knew. Now Caesar, her smooth accent did wonders to his name. Is a secret, is it not? She smiled craftily. Caesar frowned at this as the crowd burst into a chorus of ahs and why nots. Although, being the good host he was, Caesar sided off and motioned for the crowd to quiet down. Will you ever tell us before you go? He asked politely. Before I go to my grave. Fleur replied. Harry? Caesar asked, unknowingly shooting at Harry's daydream. The glass-eyed boy snapped back to reality and smiled sheepishly. Sorry. He apologized. Caesar waved it off. So will you tell us who this girl is? Or will you be like Fleur? He continued on. Harry decided that he would not torture them like the French maiden and cleared his throat. I'll tell, he said. I'll tell it all. Author's reply section, crashing mirth. I aim to please, and thank you. Nervous face, I'm surviving well enough with the exams and all that. But don't worry. The translations will eventually come when you least expect it. Thank you for reading and commenting. Today, I have a feeling that none of us are going to get anywhere with this. So let's leave the topic alone. And thank you. Thank you for RR and everything else. I am glad you like the Foxface/Cedric pairing. Although I never planned that out. I might make them official though, but probably not. Who knows? As for your questions, if I even try to answer them, I'll probably end up blurting the whole plot. So I won't. Nervous face, Ninja Master. Does this answer your questions? Nervous face, sorry I took long for updating. I was a bit caught up with studies and whatnot. Thank you for reading and reviewing. I'm glad you enjoyed it thus far. Splack 13. Nicely thought out plot? I feel embarrassed admitting this, but this was just mostly a spur of the moment idea. I was lucky enough that the plot bunny hadn't run away before I could write the idea down. Though, thank you. And thanks for always reading and reviewing. Question for everyone. FTAE has brought it to my attention that using the nickname Foxface is a bit too repetitive, so I was wondering if you guys won't mind if I give Cedric's fellow district tribute a name. I'm free for name suggestions too. So, hit me. Nervous face, not literally thought, but a response would be gladly appreciated. Far too weak. Can I never make this section interesting? Cho Chang. It was a name that was famous in Harry's heart. The girl who owned that name had her very own corner in that organ of his. It used to beat for her love her. Cho was a girl that he used to dream of. She was an infatuation and a distraction to the mind. Harry had always admired her from afar, wondering if she would ever look his way. Cho. She wasn't his. That special smile she was blessed with? It was exclusively for Cedric Diggory. Any other competitor for that unique reward should give up before he even tried. That was how dear Cedric was to her. That was how much Cho Chang loved him. Well, Harry, Caesar asked, Would he ever find a girl that would smile at him the same way? Harry had to be honest with himself. His love for Cho had only grown stronger since he had acquired the knowledge that there were other boys competing for her attention. And knowing that he had been the only successful one to have her ever notice him, had only fueled his desire for her. Her name is... Harry paused. Should he go through with his thought? Would he be reckless if he did? Did he even really care for the outcome? Harry gulped. Katniss Everdeen. A giant broom had swept the crowd into silence. The boy that Caesar was interviewing had said the name so confidently, so clear. It was pristine to the human ear and brain that he had said what everyone thought he had uttered. But why was it so hard to comprehend? Well, the two would have to kill each other, right? Slowly, as if their minds were linked, various people began to sniffle and sob. The empathy and sympathy they harbored for the couple was overwhelming the rest of their senses. They refused to think anymore and just focused on the fact that two lovers would have to kill themselves in order to survive. Although, most surprisingly, was the fact that Harry was completely unfazed by his whole confession. He thought he would have felt regret seep into his system after announcing his fellow tribute's name, but apparently, he hadn't. Why? Harry did not know. All he could do was force a small smile on his face as he looked at the surrounding screens. The huge screens were set on Katniss's face at the moment, and she looked priceless, completely and utterly shocked to the core. Caesar took out a hanky and wiped the corner of his eyes. Small teardrops were starting to protrude from them. My deepest consolidations, boy, he said. Harry nodded his head, as if to wave the pitiful looks away from him. He had received enough of them back home, and therefore, he really didn't want any more coming from strangers. Instead, he just focused back on the host and adjusted his tie. It's all right. I've learned to accept our situation since we saw each other on stage. Honestly, it was tough, but what can I do, right? Harry said, speaking from his heart. He had no other memorized lines from Haymitch that could relate to their situation anymore. He would have to play it off now. He had to be original and perhaps even unforgettable. Yes, what can you do? Caesar sniffed. He leaned in and held both of Harry's hands in his. Squeezing them, he let go and patted the boy's spiny back. Have you ever told her? He asked. Harry shook his head. I don't think she's ever known me till now. Because, I've always watched her from a distance, said Harry. He leaned back in his seat and recalled a memory of his old childhood back when he knew he was different from other kids. Back to the time when he didn't even have knowledge of wizards or witches. Hello? Harry froze like a statue, eyes wide. He watched from the corner of his eye as a small girl quietly crept in front of him. She was small in stature and, if possible, was skinnier than him. If he focused enough, he was positive that he would be able to count all the joints that her summer dress showed. Achez-le. Harry gulped. He juggled the mail in his hand. Uncle Vernon had sent him out to fetch them and quickly returned back home. He was already in deep trouble since he had taken his time getting them, but now he was going to face murder. He was talking to an outsider, someone his uncle had never introduced him to. Why do you look so scared? I won't hurt you. The girl's gray eyes showed the tiniest bit of worry for him. Harry instantly felt guilty. No, no. He raised his hands up, as if to show that he was not afraid. But at the same time, he flinched as he heard the mail scatter on the ground. He quickly bent down and tried to recollect them whilst he tried to console the girl. You don't scare me, he said. The girl raised her shifty eyes. She was doubtful of him, but at least she was willing to give him a chance. Harry's eyebrows scrunched together. Why couldn't he remember that little girl's name? So this must be the first time you ever officially met her, Caesar said, stating rather than questioning. Harry nodded his head. Harry smiled, extending out a hand for her to shake. The girl reached out to shake it, but was stopped as something faintly growled. Blushing, her hand retreated to her stomach as she covered it sheepishly with both her arms. I'm sorry, she apologized, hanging her head low. Her brown fringe shadowed over her dim eyes. Being a child, Harry could not help but laugh. He rose from the cement, mail all under one arm, and grinned down at her. The little girl looked up at him shocked. Her cheeks were a brilliant crimson now, but as she saw that he was laughing out of amusement and not out of spite or mockery, she laughed along with him. "Are you hungry?" Harry asked politely. Although he knew that she probably had a home to go back to, he felt compelled to offer her food. Even if he could scarcely get enough for himself at the table, at least he knew that he would be able to make some food for her. "Yes." The girl mumbled quietly. She was timid about it. She was barely fed well at her house, the reason being her family wasn't as well off as most. Well, Harry paused and looked ahead of him. His uncle's house was towering over them, and he knew that he would soon have to hurry in if he wanted to live. "I might take a while, but I'll get you something to eat. I have to give this my uncle first." He raised the arm composed of mail. "But then I'll make you something to eat." "Where do you live?" Harry said. The girl fumbled with the ends of the ribbon tied into her hair. She looked uncomfortable with the question, but at the same time, seemed willing enough to offer him the information. "Near," she said, "but too far for you. I'll just come by again, and," her eyes were searching, "and I'll bring something as a thank you." She finished, happily figuring out the rest of her sentence. Harry shook his head. Why don't we just meet at the side of my house? The right side? My uncle is a bit strict, so." The little girl nodded encouragingly. "Understand. I understand. So okay. I'll come by later again, yes?" she said eagerly. Harry chuckled at her readiness. "Yes. See you later. So sweet." "Well, looks like that's all the time we have for you, Harry," Caesar said. Harry nodded his head, barely aware that he had relayed the account of their supposed first meeting. "Well, if they believe me, I guess that's all that matters," he thought, casting a glance at the audience. He stood up with Caesar Flickerman and bowed with him in unison. "Everyone, give it up for Harry Potter," he exclaimed. The round of applause that he received was tremendous. It was loud and unending. As Harry finally left the stage, he could still hear the clapping and shouting. Harry wondered how long his fame would last till they all found out that it was a lie. Casting a glance to his right, he already knew that one person had seen the truth. Katniss's eyes were hard, she knew. Harry did not love her. He could never give her that kind of emotion willingly. The two were just too independent for their own good. But luck was on the boys' side that night. As the cameras flashed at their faces one more time, Harry was saved from the possible beating that shone in Katniss's eyes. Her expression screamed murder behind that lovely mask she wore. Harry held her and tightly as they exited the stadium. "We need to talk," Katniss hissed, ushering him into their section of the building. They were alone for now, and could hold a fight without anyone ever finding out. Harry numbly nodded his head and leaned against the wall. "What were you thinking, saying that?" Katniss demanded. She crossed her arms and impatiently awaited his answer. She was a far outcry from the little girl in his past. "Honestly, I dunno," Harry admitted. Katniss frowned. "What?" "I don't know," Harry pronounced each word clearly. "They were demanding an answer from me, so I just said the first name that popped into my head." He said, "But you don't love me. You never know." Harry's voice trailed off, unconsciously fueling the girl's building rage. "But what else do you want me to do? I couldn't give them a name with an actual face. They could have hunted that person down, killed her." Harry said, "So? How does that make anything better? They'll think we're in love now," she shouted, her hands curling into fists. She trembled at the chaos of lies. Harry had not been thinking this night. "They think I'm in love. Not you, Katniss. You're safe."
Replied Harry.
He silently watched as Katniss tried to calm herself down. She took big breaths in and exhaled out. For such a small lie, she was making things more trivial than they had to be. "You don't understand it, do you?" Katniss mumbled, thinking of Prim and the others. What if they do background checks? What if the Capitol's television crews decided to see if what Harry said was true? What if they discover her family? Her mother? Katniss shook her head. She knew she was overreacting, but when it came to the Capitol, she knew that you could never have too much of that. "Whatever. Just give me some time to myself," she grumbled, roughly pushing past him. In the back of her head, she knew that she had shoved him too hard, and the confirmation she received was the crashing of a glass vase. It had stood on a pedestal beside Harry, and she had pushed the boy into it. Had she hurt him? No, she decided. She hadn't hurt him that much. Anyway, he deserved this. He did, after all, avoided her like a plague and then suddenly announced to the whole nation that he was in love with her. What kind of guy did that? Why would Harry ever do that to her? Frowning, Katniss pressed her body against the hallway's wall. She still wore her dress, and knew as each second passed that she was ruining it. But you don't love me. Katniss cursed herself for even bringing up that word. Love was not something you can easily say to someone. You don't tamper with it for fun. You never know. You also never give false truth to someone. Katniss wondered if Harry knew what he was doing, toying with her, because deep in her mind, she knew that he was something to her. She knew that he meant something to her even if was by only the slightest bit. Katniss stumbled into her bedroom and tore her dress off of her. Standing inside her room with only a thin layer of clothing left over, she grabbed a pair of pajamas and headed into the bathroom connected with her room. In there, she let the water momentarily wash her clouded thoughts away. Knock! Smash! Katniss's eyes shot open. In the midst of a dense darkness, she figured out the outline of the door and half-blindly marched towards it. She had not slept yet. Katniss. Strange, the girl thought, staring at her mentor. Only a thin line of alcohol seeped from him. You hurt Harry, said Haymitch bluntly. Katniss nodded her head, well aware of it. It's his fault, she said. He shouldn't have just blurted that out. He didn't even mean it. Haymitch shrugged. But he saved you too. How? Katniss asked skeptically. You know how I'm responsible for getting you 2 sponsors for the games? Well, after Harry's brave confession, I've had people flocking to me rather than the other way around. Because of Harry, you 2 will have support that will rival the careers. Haymitch explained. Katniss grumbled silently to herself. She knew where the man was heading, but she refused to admit any sort of guilt she was slowly harboring. The 2 fell in a lingering silence. Katniss cleared her throat. Well, she said quietly. Aren't you going to say anything else? She asked. Haymitch shook his head. I said all I needed to say, Katniss. It's only you who hasn't. His head dipped low before quickly rising up again. Good night. As if drinking off the air itself, Haymitch staggered out of her sight and far from her and Harry's rooms. There was no question he was planning to get himself drunk tonight. Probably to congratulate himself, Katniss thought bitterly. But she knew that he was right. She did have some unsaid words that needed to be spoken. So scanning both ends of the hallway, she tiptoed her way to Harry's door. Something inside her stirred, telling her that he too was awake. Knocking quietly, she pressed her ear to the door. Harry, she whispered. On the other side of the door, she heard shuffling and then felt pressure from the other side. No doubt he was leaning against it. Yeah. She heard his muffled voice. Katniss gulped. Do you love her? She asked instead. There was a long pause on the other end before Harry replied. Who? That girl who you didn't want to talk about. Katniss answered quietly. Again, it took a while for Harry to reply yes. A lump was forming in Katniss's throat. What's her name, Harry? She asked. Hermione Granger. Katniss didn't know how else she would respond. Now she knew who claimed Harry's heart, and after a few hours of deep thinking, she thought she wouldn't feel bothered that he had someone. She didn't. Good night, Harry, she whispered, standing up. Harry did the same from the other side. Good night to you too, Katniss. This feels rushed, but I spent a week fuming over it. Oh well, I hope you guys enjoy the newest chapter. Author's reply section. Too sleepy to reply to anyone. Sorry. Again. Question for everyone. FTAE has brought it to my attention that using the nickname Foxface is a bit too repetitive, so I was wondering if you guys won't mind if I give Cedric's fellow district tribute a name. I'm free for name suggestions too. So, hit me. Nervous face, not literally thought, but a response would be gladly appreciated. Count yourself lucky. It was the morning of the first day of the games. All the tributes had spent most of it being briskly awakened and shoved into their showers. Though many managed to survive the onslaught of hysterics from their prep teams, others, suffice to say, had more troubling things to overcome. like for one, surviving the first half of the games. Cedric Diggory had little to no courage at all of escaping these dreaded events. His magic was failing him bit by bit as each day passed, and the hope that once burned inside him was smitten to ashes. His eyes wavered over to his mentor, and he wondered for the briefest second if he had ever really believed in him. Cedric doubted it very much. "You sure you don't want a glass of water? Food? Mate, I ain't gonna lie to you, you're probably gonna go starve in the arena," his mentor advised. Cedric wanted to yell at the man to shut up right then. His mentor, Jack, was sitting on the couch stuffing his belly with all sorts of delights. Cedric found the sight putrid as he imagined those children that barely had enough food to eat in his disweight. What? Cedric furiously shook his head and stopped his pacing. How could he have even remembered that? He never once lived a day in his so-called district, and here he was recalling memories of it? What was going on? Cedric's mouth formed a thin line as he glanced at Jack once more over. "You'll supply us, right? When we need something in the arena?" questioned Cedric. Jack shrugged in response. "Can't say, mate. It all depends on how many sponsors you can give me." Cedric bit his lip to prevent himself from scoffing. "That's your job, isn't it?" he asked. He was certainly hoping that Jack had not spent the majority of his time lounging around the kitchen doing Merlin knows what. "Not entirely," Jack replied, his eyes suddenly finding the glass that was starting to encase one of his tributes. In that brief moment, as it rose up around him, something inside Jack seemed to go down. Although, before Cedric had time to process it, he was rising into the arena. "Jack?" he found himself calling out. Jack swallowed the food in his mouth and started to launch himself in one of his devil-may-care speeches, but stopped short. Instead, he just nodded off to Cedric and saluted him. "Good luck, Cedric," he said. The boy did not reply back as the glass tube he was in had arisen onto the arena itself. Among him were other tributes entrapped in their own temporary jails, anticipating for their moment to move and or kill. Cedric's eyes darted to every face he could find before they stared into Foxface's familiar, impeccable calm. She was looking at anything but him. Smart, Cedric thought, instantly regretting his late realization. The rest of the tributes were also doing the same that he should have done before look for supplies. Cedric glanced around. So far, the cornucopia provided all means of service for any bloodthirsty git, whilst backpacks were scattered all around them. The nearest one to him lay a few feet ahead, dead in sight for the other two tributes near him. Cedric cursed and reanalyzed the situation. All right, he thought, checking out the two girls by him. They were both shorter and lankier compared to his strong stature, but looks were often deceiving. But it's either take the bag or leave empty-handed, another part of his brain argued. Cedric sighed aggravatingly as he saw the logic behind that statement. He was better off fighting the girls rather than flee without anything. As the last seconds were ticking by, Cedric finally concluded on his course of action. He would survive today. Death would have to claim another victim beside him. And in the midst of the chaos that would ensue before him and the others, he had failed to notice that Jack had finally called him by his name. Fleur was anything but short. As the glass around them shattered down, she had willed her long legs to sprint for the cornucopia. She knew that in her current state, both physical and emotional, that she was the weakest of all. So she ran and grabbed the first thing she saw, rope. Cursing her unfortunate luck, Fleur sprinted further in, careful to weave in and out of the center and line of fire. Only once, when she was certain that her arms could not hold anymore, she ran for the tall grassy fields. Gotcha. The word was a whisper in the wind as pain seared throughout her left leg. Fleur screamed as she tumbled forwards, dropping all her equipment around her. She cringed again as the pain pulsed, but bit back the scream this time. She had little time to move and save her life. Grabbing the dirt in front of her, Fleur pushed herself up just in time as another knife landed ambient to her hand. The French beauty did not look back as she sprinted for cover, scavenging what little she could get from the ground. Fleur refused to believe that her time was up as she ran further into the grass. It was as tall as her, and given the current disarray the center field was, she was sure that no one would come in and risk getting lost just for her death. Not yet, anyway, not when it was this early in the game. It was bad. Fleur debated on whether or not she should rip a piece of her clothing to cover up the wound, but decided against it. Instead, she took in the little objects she had managed to pick up during her flee for survival. Sadly, she was only stuck with the rope, a knife, and a single ration of bread. She would have to work with what she got. Taking the rope and knife in hand, Fleur ripped the bottom half of her pants off and coiled it around the bleeding wound. She took the rope in her other and used the knife to cut a small piece off to tie around her bandage. Throughout the whole thing, she cringed and silently cried, but Fleur stuck through it all. She put the rest of her inventory away before slowly rising to her feet. She couldn't stay in one place for long, especially not with her blood decorating a convenient path for any tribute that would have happened to come across it. But the minutes hadn't passed enough until she heard a rustle somewhere around her. Having the grass for cover was smart, but it also benefited the hunter stalking its prey. Fleur fumbled with her knife till it was in her hand before she ventured further into the grass. Her peculiar mantra forever engraved and running her head. "Harry," Cedric breathed out in relief. He released the boy from his hold and pressed his back against an adjacent tree, its bark prickling at his sweaty back. "You almost scared me." The said boy merely gave him a soft grin in reply as he too pressed his body against a tree. He had been running since he'd taken that pack of supplies. What other thoughts that concerned the others momentarily disappearing? This was part of the secret deal they had made at Point 1. Survival before anything else. "Have you seen the others?" Cedric asked, looking around. Harry shook his head before a spear whizzed past them both. Break time was over. "Fleur!" Cedric exclaimed, gladly running to the girl. He was well aware of the current moon maliciously grinning over them as he ignored the coldness seeping into his system and pushed on. Once he was in front of the girl, his happiness dispersed. She was practically almost lying on her deathbed. "What happened to you?" Cedric whispered, dropping to his knees. He shrugged off the coat he had retrieved and wrapped it around the shivering girl. She looked as if she had plunged herself into an ocean and recently swam out of it. Fleur did not reply. "But she's still alive," Cedric noted in his mind as he carried her back to the woods. It was safer and warmer there, he could look after her better. "Fleur?" He called out quietly, trying to wake the girl from her comatose state. He tried to gently shake her awake, but his attempt was in vain. So he gave up on that sense of hope and looked for something else that might be wrong with her. It was in that moment did he catch sight of her torn pants and wound. Purging the thoughts of disgust and worry, Cedric carefully planned out his next steps of action. After all, it was night and he had all the time in the world. Plus, I have a wand, he thought, starting his work. Even though his magic was becoming unprofitable in the particular world, he was trapped and he knew that he still had enough energy and magic to cast some protection spells over them. So in the end, he would be able to gather some herbs and water for Fleur while she slept on in her invisible force field. But things weren't going his way that night. Thrice he had a run-in with a group of careers whilst 10 times did he continuously almost pick up poisonous berries for his growing hunger. Although Cedric did his best to ignore it and struggled to continue on. His mind was set on saving Fleur's life, and save it he would. "I hope Harry's okay," Cedric thought, worryingly glancing at the sky. There was smoke arising from a far-off area, but it was enough to attract any nocturnal predators lurking the shadows of the forest. Cedric increased his pace as he prayed that the others were intelligent enough not to copy that foolish tribute, whoever they may be. Cedric would have also planned his doubts on Crumb's survival rate if not for the fact that the man had appeared dead to him since their time before the interviews. The intimidating Quidditch player had avoided them like a plague since then and had given Fleur the cold shoulder since his tiny disappearance. The man had seemed to dismiss their original plan of sticking and working together. Should have never even recruited him. A girl's voice wavered arrogantly to Cedric's perceptive ears. He stopped in his tracks and strained to listen in on the conversation. "We had no choice and he is useful in some ways." This time it was a boy. Cedric guessed a male around his age, and that was Cato. Cedric vowed to never forget that guy in the arena. He was deceitful and cunning at the same time. Well, he's provided all he can, so why not kill him now? The girl offered. Based on her cold and hostile attitude, she must have been Clove. Cedric was dealing with the people of District 2, not the exact pair he was willing to bet his chances with. Because we need him, Clove. Just deal with it and move on. He hasn't done anything bad yet. Cato argued exasperatedly. It would seem that the two had gone over this subject countless of times already. Clove sighed in reply. Yet she almost said agreeably. But when he does, her voice trailed off, leaving any eavesdropper to his or her imagination. Cedric could only imagine the worst death Clove was willing to put the poor guy into. He frowned at that thought and wondered how merciless these people were. Recollecting his composure, he was about to continue on his way when his breath hitched at the next sentence Cato uttered. Someone's been here. Cedric's adrenaline kicked in as he frantically looked about. Sure, he was taking the same path he had used to get to the creek, but had he left that much of an impression on the forest for them to pick it up? His mind gave up with panicking and instead let its focus wander to his ears. Which way? Clove was speaking quietly this time, and this made Cedric more aware of how close he actually was to the others. There was a pregnant pause until, further to your right. I heard someone breathing heavily. Cato said. Only one name came into Cedric's head at this. Fleur. And she was awake, but sadly, she was in no condition to run or fight back. Darn it all, Cedric cursed, softly storing his fresh water and herbs away. With one final sigh, he opened his mouth and shouted, Hey! No words were needed to be exchanged after that. Cedric picked up on the pounding of footsteps almost instantaneously as he also ran farther away from Fleur. Even he couldn't find her again. At least he knew that she was awake now and would be surviving another day. That was all he could ask for right now. I could apparate, he considered, but as quickly as the idea came, he dismissed it. He doubted with the amount of concentration and energy he had he would be able to do that. So what else did he have left over? What tricks did he have left to pull? In his mind, Cedric began to go through the process of flipping through his imaginary spell book and sought for the perfect and doable spell he could preform. None had come to mind yet. Schwick! Cedric's eyes widened as they spotted the dagger lodged into the tree. He sprinted even faster, but his legs had been sore since this morning. He hadn't properly rested since last night. Come on! Pretty boy! He heard Cato shout towards him. Cedric gritted his teeth as he finally locked down on one spell, the first spell he had ever considered at all. Bending slightly down, Cedric was about to tug his wand free from its case around his leg before something heavy tackled him. The wind was knocked out of his lungs, and for a moment, Cedric briefly wondered if the tribute had thrown a boulder at him rather than his own body. Got you, he heard Cato seethe from behind. Cedric scowled as he tried to struggle for freedom. Cato might have been stronger, but Cedric still had the will to live. Get off! Cedric shouted, finally pushing himself up. He relished at the breath of air he got and stood up once again. Only this time, when he did, he was prepared for Cato's next attack. Cedric stepped to the side and sprinted off again, the cold air biting his lungs. Bloody heck! Cedric wildly thought, finding another too close for comfort dagger flying past him. He turned on his heel at the last moment to switch directions. In the distance, he heard Cato skid to do the same. He's ruthless, but, again, taken in surprise, a lithe figure appeared in front of him. Cedric quickly recognized it to be Clove, and with all his might, he pushed past her. But the girl had other plans. Crazy as they were, she clung onto Cedric's arm, nearly letting herself to be dragged across the dirt. She was deliberately using her body as an anchor. Talk about teamwork. Cedric tried to shake her off, but she was making herself deadweight against him. Sometimes digging her heels into the dirt, sometimes digging her nails into his arm. Cedric scowled at her attempts as Cato's own heavy footsteps sounded closer and closer. At this rate, Cedric was dead in literal terms as well. So he did the only thing he could. He swung Clove into a nearby tree. Hearing her scream was painful because he knew it was his fault, but at the same time he was glad at the fact that he could run at full speed again. The only problems he now faced was his endurance and escaping District 2's wrath. But maybe I don't have to worry about losing them. A bright flame of hope ignited inside of him. After all, he had hurt Clove, and Clove was Kato's partner. If she was hurt, then surely Kato would take the time to check up on her health, right? Wrong. Kato was still chasing him. One look over his shoulder proved that. Cedric closed his eyes in disbelief until something miraculous overcame him. At one point, he felt as if his face was mingling with the icy air. But now, it was embraced by warmth. Slowly, Cedric had come to realize that he had collided into someone. Cedric? Fleur's accent never sounded as heavenly as now. Cedric didn't grin at her, but merely embraced her with his arms. Fleur hesitantly returned the gesture before she emitted out a tiny scream. Her small hands slapped over her mouth as she stared past him. Regretting on ever letting his guard down, Cedric turned to face the same direction to see the two most people he dreaded seeing right now. Clove and Kato. The two stood just in front of the magical barrier Cedric had created, shielding them from everybody else's view. Now, the only problem they faced was getting away quietly. What do you mean he just disappeared? That's impossible. Clove frowned, crossing her arms. Her nose was bloody, and she stood in a limp. I can't say, but he just did, alright? Kato sighed. It was like their earlier conversation. A bicker on who was right and who was wrong, a challenge of who was the alpha and who was the co-leader. Something gently tugged on Cedric's sleeve. He looked to his side to see Fleur gesturing at the tree. She wanted to climb it. Cedric raised an eyebrow, asking, "Are you sure? Can you do it?" Fleur eagerly nodded her head and signed for him to give her a lift. Cedric glanced at the quarreling duo before nodding. He quietly helped her up with the first few branches before he let her go on her own. Chancing one more look at the arguing two, he followed her. The two tiredly smiled, appeased for the time being. What if he climbed up the tree instead? Clove suggested. The smile disappeared, and Cedric began to regret ever leaving her conscious in the first place. Him and Fleur warily watched as Kato considered this idea before he shook his head. Can't be. We would have seen them by now, he said. And what if you're just blind? She was definitely testing her partner now. Kato grimaced as he reminded himself that he still needed her. He counted to 10 before sighing. Go check if you don't believe me, he said, his voice drowning out Fleur's quick gasp. Clove seemed pleased by the idea as she walked under the tree and looked up. Cedric prayed that the branches and his enchantment was good enough to hide the both of them. The seconds that had passed seemed to play out in hours until Clove finally left the tree alone. Fine, but it's night. We can't be sure, she said. Kato took out something from his pocket. Neither Cedric nor Fleur could see it, but they were both sure it wasn't something that would benefit them. Their thoughts were proven correct as Clove smiled. Why haven't I thought of that? She said, amused. Do it, Kato, she added authoritatively. Kato nodded his head and grabbed something from the ground. He threw it at the tree's trunk before running something a match across it. The bitter scent of ash flourished in the air. Should we wait? Clove asked as Kato headed back to her. The boy shook his head, the word tired evident on his face. The fire will spread quick enough. Let's just go, he murmured. His tone left no space for an argument, so Clove turned to follow him away, a pout obviously displayed on her face. All right, she mumbled in agreement, noticing that the fire was indeed making its climb to the top. If there were people up there, they would be fried in the next 10 minutes or so. Fleur and Cedric exchanged worried glances at this. Both had escaped death's grasp countless of times already, so how were they to run away now? Fix you. There was no night so dark, so magical as night at Hogwarts. Blanketing the majestic castle in a starry cotton wool, almost everyone slept with ease and peace. As Harry stared at the dark abyss overshadowing him, he marveled about the others and what they were doing. During the recent events that occurred in his life, he had hardly enough time to contemplate on his previous life. Although, as he thought about it more, Ron, Hermione, everyone and everything seemed like a figment of his imagination. A very desirable figment. A rustle above him brought his senses aware to the current disposition he was thrown in. Strangely enough, no panic arose in his system. Instead, he continued to spy the treetops that glowered over him. Among them was a little black shadow flitting from branch to branch. A breeze billowed through the creaking forest and a small object wrapped in cloth fell on Harry's stomach. Slowly grabbing it, Harry unwrapped the object from its case and stared at it. Inside was a tiny bottle of elixir. There were no labels on it, so Harry was stupefied as to what the liquid was. Poison? Perhaps. Harry briefly examined the cloth it came with. On one side was a note hurriedly stapled. It read, "Use it in an emergency. Hey Mitch." Harry turned the bottle in his hand. Hey Mitch had sent him something? He was surprised. Overall, Harry thought that the drunken BS man would have chosen Katniss over him. Though of course who wouldn't? Katniss had a chance for survival, he had none. Perhaps if he had his wand he would have, but alas he did not. His prized possession was gone. And so, Harry stuffed the bottle into one of his pockets and set off. His stomach was accustomed to starving, so he knew that he could manage at least one more day without food after that. He wasn't willing to provoke his hunger any longer. Another rustle echoed above. And then another and another. Harry's head watched the trees as he tried to determine where the person was headed off to. He was sure that whoever they were was quite small. No person the size of the male District 2 or 11 tribute would be able to have caused such almost imperceptible movements such as the ones he had recently heard. Wait, someone's near. Harry froze. His eyes widened as he looked off to his left. In the distinct coverage of the bushes were two faint outlines. The boy did not wait to discover where they were. He took off to the nearest bushel of trees before darting in and out of their shadows, the faint rush of footsteps giving him enough incentive to keep moving on. Then suddenly he was struck by an idea. It was ridiculous, but Harry was desperate for anything. In the spur of the moment, he suddenly jumped up at a tree and grabbed the nearest branch he could reach. Digging his nails into it, Harry pulled himself up and climbed up higher and higher. The other two tributes were still far off. What's that? Harry's nose took a sudden whiff of smoke. His head turned to see that something in the nearby perimeter was burning. Harry got the incentive that it was the previous two's doing. Hurrying up with his plan, Harry proceeded to climb higher and higher until he spotted another branch nearby. It belonged to another tree, and Harry was keen on getting to it. Where did they go? He heard a girl's voice ask. Stuck between the two firm branches, Harry peeked below and saw that the two tributes were indeed District 2 tributes. Both looked threatening, and so, Harry sucked in his breath and finished clambering onto the next branch. The previous one gave a creak and all was silent. The first thought that entered Harry's mind wasn't pleasant. Cursing at his inability to move quietly, Harry scurried through the remainder of the branch and leaned against the firm bark. It's always the trees. Another voice complained. Should we burn it? Clove questioned, letting her arms adamantly cross against her chest. Her counterpart shook his head and said something quietly in reply. Unlike her, Cato was aware that their conversation could be easily picked up by any bystander and/or target. Clove perked at the idea her partner offered as she nodded and followed after him away from Harry's tree. The said boy sighed in relief as he gathered himself and dropped to the ground rambunctiously. Almost flinching at the noise he made, Harry did a quick scan of his surroundings before bolting for the opposite direction the duo had left in. Without taking a break from his run, Harry only had to trip once before he finally caved into his exhaustion. His forehead was raining with sweat and his lungs burned in fatigue. Clinging onto a nearby tree, Harry forced himself to stand up and lean against it. He stared up at the night sky, hoping to escape the hunger and the weariness that had blanketed him. Sliding to the floor, the last thought that flickered in his mind was about a brown-haired beauty armed with a bow and arrow. The great hall was slowly losing its inhabitants as they scurried off to their designated classes. Only a few remained, some gossiping, others snogging. But among the lingering crowd were four very familiar faces. The first two seemed to argue whilst the other two remained invisible to the first pair. We have to go, Ron? A curly-haired girl exclaimed. She crossed her arms at her companion, as if daring him to contradict or argue with her any more. And we have to stay. The redhead, Ron said exasperatedly. The doppelgangers behind him rolled their eyes as one proceeded to make faces behind his back as the other opened and closed a hand beside his face. And may I ask why is that? Harry needs us. Hermione frowned at him. Because, he drawled out the word. Fred's hand parted at a long time for this. We need a plan and we're going into the unknown. Hermione, Ron, you're being a coward. That's unbecoming of you. Hermione chastised. She finally looked past him and noticed Fred copying Ron's exact words with his hand while George was persistent with his making faces. The mood in her gradually lightened as she bit the inside of her cheek to prevent the torrent of laughter. Mione? Have you even been listening to me? Ron raised an eyebrow as he examined her closely. He noticed the glee dancing in her eyes and scowled. What's so funny? He interrogated. Hermione glanced at him before looking at the twins. At last, through all her effort, she finally released her laughter at Ron's displeasure. Hermione! Ron bellowed. Ronnikins! The twins shouted. Ron jumped at this and whirled around. Only, when he did, George faced the opposite way whilst Fred grinned at him mockingly. Ron's face colored to match his hair. You too, he seethed. Oh, relax, Ronnikins. We didn't do anything. Fred easily lied. Yeah, we were just observing your bickering. Right, George? George quipped. Fred nodded in agreement. Right, Fred. Ron shook his head. Bloody heck, he mumbled. Aren't you George and you, Fred? Ron questioned, pointing at the correct faces. The twins looked offended. And you call us family? Fred gasped. Why, you don't even know how to tell us apart. George put a hand on his chest to add to the dramatic act. Ron was about to reply haughtily at this when a sudden shadow towered over them. With everyone turning around, they faced one of the most opposed professors in Hogwarts. Severus Snape. Shouldn't all of you be in class? Miss Granger? Weasleys? His tone dripped in venom. The three boys nodded and stuttered out a yes, sir, while Hermione remained silent and filed out of the empty great hall with them. As they left the grand room, Fred and George each hooked an arm around their brother. Ron tried to struggle out of their hold, but alas, the twins outmatched him too much. What are you two doing? Ron hissed, careful to avoid the eavesdropping portraits. The two twins shared a mischievous grin. Ask Hermione. Was the only tip they offered. The next time Harry came to his senses, he was bounded to the trunk of a tree. Dazed and drunk from sleep, Harry looked around and saw a tall pyramid of food. Beside it was a boy who he had recalled seeing with the career pack earlier on in the arena. The boy, tough in build, looked at him and accessed his current state of mind. When his brown eyes saw that Harry was coming around soon, he grabbed something from behind him and put it to his lips. Harry had little time to react as he recognized the dart that was cutting through the air and towards him. He opened his mouth, about to protest, but the sleep was dragging him back to its cave. Katniss wasn't lying when she was shocked to see Harry with the career pack. He sat asleep by a tree and looked well-fed. An unknown sense of betrayal filled inside of her as she fumbled with her thoughts. There were so many questions about him that she couldn't even think about anything else. Although finally, when she had gotten her composure together, she was too late. A red-head fiend danced across the field and towards the pyramid of food. Sneaking some things with her, she departed with a quiet grin laced on her features. Katniss was in disbelief. Had the girl not noticed Harry sleeping by the trunk? Or had she, and was silently laughing at his unfortunate luck of having not heard her? But what nagged Katniss's insides the most was the fact that the girl, a foxy-looking female, had only touched particular spots of the field. Was the whole place rigged with bombs? Katniss would not put it past the career pack to have put something as incredible as that. But Harry, Katniss had to shove her thoughts about him away. He was with the enemy, and therefore he was an enemy as well. Grabbing an arrow from her pack, she aimed at a portion of the pyramid. If she could trigger the so-called bombs dug into the earth, then she would be able to kill off the career's food storage and reunite with Rue quicker. Inhaling a huge breath of air, Katniss was about to shoot when she noticed a burly tribute wander into the area. Taking back her bow, Katniss waited with a bated breath as the boy went behind Harry's tree and come back out, taking her once friend with him. Where? Katniss frowned and shook her head. She was getting sidetracked too much and she needed to do this fast. Rue's life was in possible peril with this plan, so she had to get it done quickly. Drilling this dreadful thought into her head, Katniss repositioned her arrow and aimed at a satchel of food. Exhaling, she let the arrow go and watched as it fell to the ground. There was a huge explosion, and Katniss dove for safety. The monster was there and so was the water. There was an unknown pressure pushing him down, and the boy fought hard as the coldness seeped into his body. His lungs burned for air, but he could not pull his head back up. Was he killing himself? Why could he see a skeleton at the bottom of the water? Was that death awaiting him? Harry gasped as his head rose back up. Panicked, his arms flailed about him as he fought for release. The hand would not let go of his head. "Who are you?" Harry choked out from his coughing. No response answered him as his head was dunked back into the cold water. Again, he spent the bitter part of his struggle under it as his captor prolonged his time beneath it more. "I'm gonna die like this," Harry thought sadistically, giving up on his fight and trying to store his energy. And just when his lungs were getting accustomed to the lack of air, just as his eyes were seeing black spots, his head was pulled back up. Harry shivered in his drenched garments as the person who captured him threw him at a tree. He slammed into it and fell on his knees coughing. Harry was going to die, and he knew it as someone's foot impacted with his ribs. Sailing a few meters away, Harry landed on his back groaning in anguish. "Please," he mumbled, blinking the water out of his eyes. He looked at his predator to see a blurry resemblance of Viktor Krum. The infamous Quidditch player lifted him up by his collar. The boy seemed to grin at Harry until the face scrunched up in pain. Harry took this chance to lash out at Krum. The glass-eyed boy dropped to his knees. "Aren't we a bit of a bully?" a familiar voice shouted. Harry watched as Krum whirled around in fury and charged at the other tribute while two gentle hands put themselves on Harry's shoulders. "We're gonna get you out of here, Harry," Fleur whispered comfortingly into his ear. Quietly, she led Harry a fair distance away, cringing with each battle cry that resonated throughout the forest. Finally, when they reached a new opening, Fleur ordered Harry to lean against a tree and took his shirt off. Easily squeezing the water out of it, Fleur hung the shirt on the nearest branch before turning back to the wheezing boy. Harry was a disaster. He was coughing and shuddering, trying to accept his near-death experience with as much control as a child. Fleur pitied him as she sympathetically wrapped a lithe arm around his shoulders. And, although no tears fell from his eyes, Harry leaned into Fleur and allowed himself to quietly mourn in defeat. Moments later, he fell asleep. "Are you okay?" Fleur's soft voice awakened him to reality a few hours later. With closed eyes, Harry acknowledged the warm shirt covering his torso and paid apt attention to the conversation the French maiden was having. "Is he?" Cedric. Better than before. There was still an undetermined sadness laced in her tone. Harry picked up on a rock hitting something. "Killed him, Fleur." Silence. Then suddenly Harry caught it. As his eyes opened, he saw Cedric's knees hitting the ground in despair. Grasping the grass beneath him, his knuckles turned a deathly shade of white as he murmured something beneath his breath. But that wasn't what Harry caught. "It was this," Cedric cried. "The sun goes down." She really didn't want to leave her body alone for the capital to take. To envision what careless plans they had in store for the dead tributes was beyond her mind, and frankly, she didn't even want to try to imagine them. Holding the deceased body of Rue close, Katniss gave her one last yearning look before heading out into the forest. Her resolve was breaking. Rue was gone. Katniss was lost beyond words. She had truly enjoyed the little girl's presence, grew very fond of her. So to let her die in her own arms was a blow too hard for her mind to take. But she had to move. She had to win. For her family. For Rue. But then, a new thought entered her mind. An idea that made her blood boil and her heart sigh. In that moment, Katniss Everdeen had chosen her new target. She just hoped they weren't dead yet.
"Oui."
Yes? Cedric's head perked up. Despite his small disappearance from them, he had been putting up with his guilt well. But the shadows were always there. Death was always around them. Harry shook his head as he played with a blade of glass. So far, they had taken to staying near the cornucopia. They had managed to scavenge some few useless leftovers and utilize them to their need. But even then, they knew that it wasn't enough. It never was. "I was thinking," How long will it take before it'll be us next? Cedric quietly mused. His eyes were dark, but his face was light. These were conflicting observations, but Harry had learned that Cedric was indeed a complicated man. I dunno, mate. Hopefully we'll be out of here before it comes to that. Harry answered. Cedric sighed and toyed with his wand. I'm gonna go and check out that grassy field over there, he suddenly announced, standing up. Harry did too. What? In the middle of the night? Are you insane? Harry hissed. Suddenly, he became more alert about possible eavesdroppers. Possibly. Cedric offered Harry one of his crooked grins. Either way, we're running short on food and we need something, he argued. Well, what about your wand? Harry offered. It's barely working. Fleur? You can take care of her. Cedric sighed and ran a hand through his distressed hair. Listen, Harry, I trust you. And, he paused briefly, I think I can get us some help. Just promise me you won't come out and go looking for me, all right, Harry? Cedric asked. Deflated, Harry knew that nothing could stop him and nodded his head. Just be careful, he said. Promise. Cedric swore before picking up his jacket and heading out. Harry could only watch at his disappearing back, having a dark enmity swallow him. 10 seconds later, Fleur emerged from the woods with 2 handfuls of eatable berries. There you go, Harry. She smiled, sliding him his share of the food. Harry took it half-heededly as he remembered that Cedric had left without anything to eat. At the same time, Fleur seemed to notice his lack of appearance. As her head turned side to side, Harry finally spoke up. He left. Fleur's eyes hardened. Why old he? She asked. Harry shrugged. Because in all honesty, he knew that the Hufflepuff's words were nothing but sentences weaved out to hide the truth. His reasons was like a sly dance, staying away from the real meaning yet never lying. Fleur noticed that this was a topic that the young boy didn't want to pursue and decided to keep quiet about it. Running a hand through her grizzled hair, she redid her ponytail before clapping her hands and grabbing her pack. Are you leaving too? Harry quietly asked. Fleur didn't speak, but he knew what she had in mind. He needs us, she said. Harry couldn't agree more. He nodded his head and pointed in the direction Cedric went. Tell him we'll all go home together. Okay? Said Harry, and tossed his lone dagger at her. Fleur caught it with practiced ease and pocketed it into her jacket. She smiled at Harry before jogging off to catch up with Cedric. This is insane, Ron cried out. He watched in stressed disbelief as his brothers unceremoniously dumped his clothes into a bag and throw it out the window where Hermione was waiting. We've already got the approval, mate, Fred said, taking one last sweep of the room. Once he was pleased with how everything looked, he walked up to Neville and handed him a week's worth of Polyjuice potion. The boy took the flasks with trembling hands as he uneasily stored them in a safe section of his trunk. Are you sure about this? He stuttered. Yeah, are you? And whose approval did you get? A chipmunk's? Ron scoffed, crossing his arms. But he was ignored as Fred set himself out to give solace to Longbottom. On the other hand, the other twin was making last-minute adjustments to his own pack of clothes tightly secured on his back. Definitely. Now you know the plan, right, Neville? George asked, setting a heavy hand on Ron's shoulder. The younger Weasley tried to shake the hold on him off, but his attempts were futile. Neville shook his head. No. Fred grinned. Good. Now off you go. Don't want to end up in the scene of crime, do you? And although the question was rhetorically asked, Neville furiously nodded his head and sprinted to the common room. Such a nice boy he is. Fred? George smiled. So easy to get along with too. If only Ronnykins was the same. Fred teased, holding up another flask to Ron. Ron tried to back away, but suddenly George had a firm grip on both his shoulders. What are you two doing? He panicked. Just a little thing called revenge, Fred said. Ron's eyes widened. The twins hollered in laughter. But yet, Ron could not shake off the bad vibe he could feel pouring out from the two. You see, Ron, we have to put you in a comatose, George said smoothly, or in a fake comatose at least, added Fred. And then at night when you're in the hospital that is to say George and I. Hermione will be safe, so don't you worry your little heart. Fred winked. We'll come and get you out. Understood? George gave Ron a firm shake. The boy did not reply. Jigar grinned. Good. Give him the potion, Fred, he said. Fred was about to, but as he advanced closer to his sibling, Ron's hands shot up in hindrance. Wait, is this potion safe? He asked. Fred nodded his head. Oh sure. No one's died from it yet. And amazingly, there was little comfort in his words. Yet, Ron gulped. Again the twin nodded. Yes, yet. You are the first tester of this kind of potion. Ron felt this close to abandoning the plan. I mean, Harry can survive on his own for a few more days, right? Ron thought. He eyed the green liquid warily. So you ready to drink it now, mate? Fred asked. Ron shook his head. One more question. Whose note of approval did you lot get? He asked. George shrugged. Ours. But I'm sure Dumbledore wouldn't mind this tiny exploration, he said. Ron rolled his eyes. Oh fine, just give me that. He frowned, snatching the flask from Fred's hand. He looked at it for 10 seconds straight before Fred inquired something insulting, and at that point, Ron just closed his eyes and downed the whole thing in one gulp. And with a gag, Ron began to cough. His vision was blurring and the world looked like it was swaying. His mind was going dark, and before he knew it, he fell on the cold hard floor. So, will he be in a pretend coma? He could catch George asking. Ron groaned as to show his disapproval at this statement. Hope so. And in that moment Ron thought he died. Work it out. Original series since 2005. The Good Times. And now there's more about Cora. And I'm just, nervous face. I shouldn't over fangirl here. But if any of you guys are a fan, PM me. Or talk to me in the review section. I need someone to fangirl with about the newest series. Harry was running. He had been since he had awakened one of the two slumbering careers. Since he and the others had broken up, he had been trying his best to keep quiet and search for some food and water. His pack of nutrition was running thin, so it was a chore he had to accomplish fast. But as the day stretched on, he found himself awarded with nothing but trouble. Twice he had lost some good kill, and 3 times did he stumble into a trap some tribute had discreetly laid out. Now, he was stuck with one of the toughest people in the game pursuing him. Luckily, if he could still call it that, it was only the girl he had awoken. The boy was still napping up some paradise about someone's death, no doubt. There. Harry let out a triumphant smile as he stretched out his arms and grabbed hold on the branch above him. Tucking his legs into his body, he watched in amusement as the District 2 girl stumbled past him with her knives in hand. She twirled around with a seething scowl. You can't run away from me forever, lover boy, she hissed, prepping herself to launch one of her knives. Harry knew she was right and let his body dangle from the branch again. He began swinging himself as if to try and launch his whole body onto the branch. Apparently, Clove thought the same thing and brought out 2 more knives to provide a better chance of getting him hit. Come on. That's it. Clove launched her pointy weapons at Harry as he swung as high as he could go. Unbeknownst to her, Harry had expected Clove to do this and dropped to the ground at the last minute. Rolling to his feet, Harry tackled Clove to the ground and wrestled her for dominance. If I can just get her pack, he thought, noticing the black holster tied to her waist. Clove noticed that he had been looking there too and growled. Struggling to push him off, she curled her legs in from beneath his body, and with a roar of supremacy, she kicked him off of her. Harry cringed as his body knocked against the ground and rose to a crouch. His tongue ran over his bottom lip and a metallic taste entered his mouth. Then, quickly looking up in time, he spotted Clove charging at him, hands all decorated with daggers. So, with reckless thoughts domineering his mind, Harry did the only sensible thing he could think of at this point. He dove in, arms spread open. He enclosed them around Clove's waist and pleasantly heard the sound of her weapons dropping to the ground. Once again, the girl was beneath him until he felt something stab his back. Wincing in pain, Harry jumped off the girl and pushed her far away from him. One hand gently pulled out the knife in his back as he watched Clove grin at him menacingly. In the distance, they could hear her partner calling out for her, and Harry knew that if he stayed any longer, he was dead. And the wizard would have opted to leave if not for his pack of food. Even though it scarcely held anything of value, it still had some things that could nourish and keep him going for a few more days. Got any more last wishes, lover boy? Clove smiled, taking out another dagger of hers. She seemed to have an endless amount of them, and her happiness became more apparent as Cato's calls became clearer. Harry frowned and shook his head. He would have to give up his pack and make a run for it now. So he bent low and gathered a few of her knives that she was forced to drop earlier. Clove's eyes narrowed at this action as she prepared another shot at him. Harry took little notice of this and counted to 3. At the last number, he threw the weapons back at her and ran away as fast as he could. And as he did so, he could hear Clove shouting in anger as another voice joined her. Seconds later Harry ran faster. He continued like this for hours and didn't stop until he tripped over a small rock and landed into a marshy-like lake. Eyes closed and holding his breath, Harry remained submerged in it until he couldn't breathe anymore. Pushing himself up, he gingerly took off his jacket and felt the gaping wound that the girl had imprinted on him. He flinched as his fingers made contact and knew that if he didn't act fast, that it would get infected. So he set to work. Harry took off his shirt and trudged deeper into the lake to clean up his wound. Once he completed that job, he got his shirt he had left to dry and put it back over his torso. Secondly, he ripped out a decent size of his sleeve off the jacket he was given and used it to tie around his wound. After that, he began to cover his said jacket with mud. "What are you doing?" a familiar voice asked. A shadow cast over him and Harry looked up into those stormy gray eyes he was slowly adapting to. Today they were more calmer than usual. "Learning how to camouflage, it might come in handy," he said bluntly. Katniss was indifferent to this revelation till dinner. The table was awfully chatty that night as their prep team and Effie conversed excitedly to each other about the other tributes and how beautiful and /PR handsome they looked. They even conveyed their opinions on who they were willing to bet would survive through the whole ordeal. Neither Katniss's nor Harry's name was announced during the list of who was going to survive. They were very supportive of them. "So Harry, are you good at painting?" Katniss quietly asked. Since the adults were so busily hosting themselves a conversation in their own world, she thought it would be decent for them to hold one of their own. Harry almost choked on his food. Sorry," he said sheepishly and took a drink of water. Once he got himself together, he shook his head at her. "Well, no," he said. "I can't paint to save my life. I'm not artistic," he answered. Katniss paused a moment and allowed herself to chew on some meat before replying. "Sorry, I just thought that since you were practicing how to do camouflaging that you'd be artsy," she admitted. Harry shook it off with a shrug and he too continued with his meal. "Well, now you know that I'm not." Besides, he gave her an innocent look. "Why would you get that idea from me doing camouflaging?" he asked. Katniss shrugged too. "I just thought, she said. "I thought that you might have had an artistic background or something that would have made you want to try that skill out." Harry laughed at this. "Surely, if there will be anything that I will never be good at, it would be being creative." Although that was what he was exactly doing right now. He was being creative, or at least doing something relatively close to it. Harry had guessed that it was somewhere between hours since he had finally finished his masterpiece of a disguise. Gently laying it out in the open sky, all he had to do was wait for his new jacket to dry, and then he would be able to put it on once again. As for his wound, he was dealing with the pain well enough and decided that with some rest, he would be able to sleep the rest of the worry it brought off. He climbed a tree and fell into a taunting sleep an hour later. "Harry." The voice was growing more incessantly louder now. The boy couldn't tell whether or not if it was coming from behind him or in front of him, but all that mattered now was that it was closer to him. "Harry." Harry closed his eyes and spun around innumerable of times. Once he was loopy on his legs, he sprinted to one of the paths in front of him and only opened his eyes when he was a few meters deep into it. He had chosen the one with the brick walls. Did he choose the right one? That was a question he desperately needed an answer to, for a fog was roaming closer and closer to him. Having no choice but to keep on going further into the unknown territory, Harry ventured farther than he would have wanted and came into an opening. The path led to a city in ruins. Turning around, Harry could only hear his labored breathing as he watched the fog fiercely battle the invisible barrier that prevented it from seeping into this new strange scenery that he was in. The voice was gone too, and Harry could only guess that he had chosen the right path after all. Slowly creeping forward into the desolate city, Harry's eyes were alert with apprehensiveness. He felt like he had been in this place before, had lived in it, had people he loved stay in the once strong walls. Harry, the said boy jumped as a feminine voice called out to him. It was peculiarly pleasant for someone who was supposedly living in a place such as this. "Oh, Harry, I knew you would come back," the voice continued to rant on. Harry's eyes squinted through the grayness of the city as he tried to make out a tiny figure from the horizon. Indeed, it was a small girl no more than 12 that was calling him. She seemed familiar. Harry's eyes flashed open as something tickled the side of his cheek. Slowly rising up, Harry looked about to him and quickly recalled that he had fallen asleep on a branch in a tree. Softly jumping down, Harry noticed that it was already night and that his jacket was still lying somewhere out in the open. Deciding that it was best that he did not freeze to death, he went to collect the discarded item. But the dream was still bothering him. Who could that girl possibly be? Harry did not remember any little girl he was acquainted with in the past. If he had forgotten about them, then he was sure that he would have remembered them by now. But he did not, and that stirred a troubling feeling inside the pit of Harry's stomach. That, and he was hungry. Having had nothing but berries since last night, Harry decided to check if there were any eatable animal or fish in the lake or nearby area. To his fortune, there were none. "Guess I'll have to deal with water for now," Harry thought, cupping some in his hands. He brought the cold liquid to his lips and eagerly slurped it down into his throat. The water was cooling yet unfilling, but that was all that Harry had for the time being, and he decided that it was better than nothing. Yet as he downed a dozen or more so handfuls of water, his stomach still felt empty and was now growling with hunger. Knowing that with even the slightest of sounds made in the cold night, the couriers could easily track him down and Harry had to act fast. So he carefully hid his jacket in a tactful area before venturing out in search of eatable berries. The night was moonless, and so Harry had a tough time seeing anything. With luck, he could only wish that he would be able to find his way back to the lake without running into any more trouble for the day. "Is this healthy?" Harry wondered, snapping one berry free from its bush. He brought it to his mouth and took a small nibble from the fruit. A few seconds passed and no side effect had overcome him, so Harry deemed the berries safe to eat. Sitting down beside Bush, Harry began to devour all that he could before deciding that it would be best to leave some for tomorrow. And since carrying them back to the lake without accidentally dropping one and leaving a trail for others to follow him was a bad idea, Harry concluded to try and memorize the path to his only food source before heading back. Little did he know that he had ignorantly stolen from somebody's storage. As the sound of his footsteps were eradicated from her ears, Foxface emerged from the tree above the bush and jumped silently to the ground. Her eyes narrowed at the pathway the glass-eyed boy had taken to and fro from her as she bent down to the level of the bush. The face of the shrub itself was almost wiped clean of fruits as Harry had taken to a lot of it. Foxface's nose scrunched up as she dug a hand through the bush, came back out to reveal a handmade basket of berries. Deciding that it might be the last time she would ever get to eat in a while, Foxface stuffed some of the berries into her pocket while she ate the remainder of the pile. Once she had completed this task, she rose to her feet and wondered if she should pursue the boy from earlier and wipe him out of the games. She had a knife, he was wounded and tired. She had the upper hand. No. Foxface closed her eyes and raced up a tree as a new person entered the small, barely their clearing. In her mind, the girl was not surprised to see who this newcomer was. But what did catch her off guard was that he knew something that she didn't expect him to. "No, you can stop hiding, you know?" Cedric's voice called out. Almost instantly, Foxface dropped to the ground with a frown already etched on her face. She stared up at Cedric as if questioning why he had been looking for her for the past day. Not to mention, why he didn't even bother to give up the search even after he nearly got killed by Thresh in the grassy fields. "I missed that face," Cedric smiled. "And the frown is still there, I see," he added. Foxface tried to stop her eyes from rolling, but they did in their own accord either way. She moved to the side, as if to protect her back from any surprise attacks. The trees behind her did provide some cover after all. "What are you doing here?" she asked, hating how her voice cracked. It was always like this. Cedric always got her talking. Cedric shrugged and leaned on a tree opposite of her. "I never really did learn your name," he quietly said, but there was still that faint amusement in his voice, as if all of this was a game, as if he didn't care whether or not he was going to die anymore. Well, unfortunately for him, Foxface still cared whether she lived or not, and with a leery scan of the perimeter she began to climb up one of the trees behind her. She didn't have to say anything to know that Cedric had either gotten her point or was still insistent on following her around. Well, his voice surprised her as Foxface jumped to another branch in surprise. He had climbed up so silently and quickly. It was a surprise to have that come off of a lanky body such as his. Foxface shook her head and began to move from tree to tree. She refused to converse with him at such late time when she could be sleeping, which brought another thought into her head. She would not have him find out where she slept. If you just told me your name, I wouldn't go to this length of following you. Attracting the careers. Cedric's voice trailed off in a taunting tone. He knew what she was thinking. He knew the worries that were racing through her head right now. Foxface let out a sigh and finally stopped. Without turning around to face him, she went through the possible outcomes of her trying to kill him. The chances of her surviving was a 0 to none. He was too big for her to take on. Just like the others. Just like the rest of the world. "Finch," she whispered, watching him from the corner of her eye. Cedric had tilted his head to the side and repeated the name silently. His eyes closed once he verbally said it out loud. "Finch?" he repeated, opening his eyes. "That can't be your first nah. She's gone." Cedric sighed as he stared at the bare branch that she had once occupied. Frowning, he knew he couldn't expect more from her and decided to call it for a day. Well, for now at least. There was a new one quickly arising, and then, he wouldn't settle till he finally got her real name out of her. "Finch?" he mused in his head, casually resting on the branch he sat on. Well, he could recall Caesar calling her that during the interviews. But that was all, no first name. Just Finch, and even that was just presuming that it was her real last name. Does she even have a first name? He began to ponder. Well, of course she does. Everyone has a name. Maybe she's embarrassed about hers. He hypothesized, but somehow that highly seemed to be the case. The next time Katniss awoke, she found herself bound and tightly gagged to a tree. How she had slept through the whole ordeal was beyond her. But what worried her the most was the vast array of weapons carefully displayed on the ground. Pathetically struggling against the rope that held her in her place, her eyes wildly scanned for any possible form of escape. Instead, they rested on something else. A pair of familiar, recently cracked glasses. "Harry!" Startled awake, Katniss rose from her position and grimaced as some of her bones cracked at the soreness they had recently been through. She glanced around her surroundings to see that she was still safe and that no one had trespassed into her makeshift camp. And although it was just bright and early, she stood up and began another hike to check up on her snares. So far, she was overflowing with food. Or well, at least she had enough to keep her alive for a few days without having to go hunting. But as she came to finishing this task, she had rounded up one more rabbit to her storage of food. She found her thoughts annoyingly wandering back to Harry. As far as she could recall, the two had not officially met each other since they first entered the arena. And the last time she saw him, he was part of the career pack. But as she thought about that more, that seemed less likely and appeared more of just a figment of her imagination. So he couldn't have betrayed her, and he was either likely dead or barely surviving. Katniss decided to go with the latter of the two and wondered if he was really in need of help. From what she had gathered, there were barely 10 of them left in the arena, and it had been silent for a while now. So the game makers could be plotting their next move to bring them together again, and if that happened, Katniss would be prepared that time and would try go reacquaint with Harry, wherever he was. Anyway, there's always a strength in numbers, right? She thought, suddenly realizing that there really was no underlying reason as to why she wanted him by her side again. But now I do, and I'm pretty sure Harry's looking for me too. Maybe, at this point, Katniss decided that she was thinking too much about everything, and paid more attention to what she needed now. And what do I need? She thought. The lone word came into her mind and she set out to find it. Water.
Mel.
Crumb all of a sudden, but you'll see why. It had been absolutely irritating for her since Cedric had tracked her down. In the back of her mind, Foxface wondered how she had even left herself so open for him. But as she looked back on the possible trails she could have left behind, Foxface concluded it to her just being plain stupid. No way would she have ever allowed Cedric to find her if her mind hadn't been battling a week's worth of fatigue. So having vaguely adapted to having someone accompany her, Foxface resorted to walking. At least this way, she wouldn't have to resort to wasting so much energy on losing him, a tactic she had long ago abandoned. Look, Cedric sighed, leaning against a tree. This was the third time they had to stop because of him, and frankly, Foxface wasn't very fond of it. Because for every second they let go by just standing around, the more chance some career or other tribute could run into them. If I'm bothering you that much, just tell me and I'll go, he said. This caught the redhead's attention. Her head perked up as she looked at him, but with that straight face, she knew better that he was just trying to lure her out of her silence. For there was no being serious with Cedric. There never was. And what's the catch? She finally asked, keeping an eye out for any disturbance in nature. Cedric smiled that same darn, lopsided smile. Foxface frowned and crossed her arms. Well, she insisted impatiently. He already had her talking, and as much as he wanted to relish the chance in hearing her voice, she would not allow it. The boy shrugged. You tell me your name, he said. Foxface shook her head and began walking again. It was always that. Her name. Why couldn't he just run into some other tribute and ask for it? Surely they might remember. But the girl knew she was being cruel, as her mind also wished for that other tribute to get rid of him. Forget about it. She sighed. Cedric chuckled and pushed himself off the tree. Following his fellow district tribute in suit, he wondered when she would finally lose it and turn her blade on him. He had seen her while she was training. She was as skilled as that Clove girl with a knife. Well, maybe not that much, but she was still something. And anyway, the redhead could probably kill him in his sleep for all he knew, but she never did. Or attempted to, at least. Hey, he called out, suddenly coming to a realization. Foxface didn't stop, but she did turn her head by a fraction. Keep quiet. You're going to attract attention to us, she reprimanded. Cedric grimaced as he knew he was being careless. In fact, he had been since he had killed Crumb, but right now he had someone else with him. Another life. Another person he could get endangered. Sorry, he mumbled, condescending into her criticism. Foxface flashed him a curious look before she looked back on the path ahead of them. Your question? She continued, deciding to ignore his sudden change in mood. Why do you put up with me? Cedric asked. Foxface rolled her eyes. Do I have a choice? She quipped and turned in time to see Cedric slide a small grin on his face. You wish, amusement evident in his tone. But in actuality you do. So why? He pressed on. Foxface shrugged. She was still working that problem out, because while she grew accustomed to his annoying remarks and presence, she knew that something else was stirring inside of her. And one she never got attached. Her mentor had taught her that. She had taught herself that. Noticing her sudden silence, Foxface shook her head. You could provide a distraction for my escape if a tribute ever finds us. She answered. Another chuckle, and suddenly, Foxface felt like she needed to wipe that ever-existent smile on his face. What? Don't believe me? She queried. Sure, Foxface. Sure, came Cedric's reply. The redhead frowned and was about to shoot a smart remark back at him when she noticed that the scenery had changed and that musky smell of the forest was gone. Cursing herself, Foxface whipped out her knife and began to throw furtive glances to every area of grass that she could see. They had gone into District 11's territory, Thresh's territory. What's wrong? Cedric asked from beside her, equally growing troubled by her sudden attentiveness. Her back had arched, putting her into a lethal crouch, and her red hair was whipping around like a tail with each turn she made. At that moment, her nickname couldn't have been more fitting. Foxface narrowed her eyes at him and resumed to her proper height, her hand still tightly holding onto the knife. Where are we? She questioned back, careful to leave as little space between them as possible. She had a plan formulating inside her head, but she needed certain pieces to be arranged in a specific position. In the Hunger Games, Cedric offered, unsure. He gave her a sheepish smile when he saw the glare she was casting him and decided to attempt at a new answer. In tall grass? Foxface nodded and inclined her head to the side. You ever wonder why the careers never bothered going in here? She didn't let Cedric answer her question this time. Because Thresh is here, and unless you have a death wish, we have to get back to the forest. Now, she stressed on the last word. Cedric frowned and looked around them. Unlike her, he was less worried about the tribute and shrugged. We can take him down, he said confidently. No, you can't. Foxface corrected. Well, I am just a decoy in the end, right? So you can leave. I'm staying. Cedric grinned, finding their situation amusing. Foxface groaned. An important decoy. My only smoke bomb. I can't lose you so quickly. So drop it and let's go. She pressed on. With her free hand, she grabbed his wrist and tried to urge him back to the direction they came from. Cedric's eyes lost their levity when they turned around. Darn. She heard him curse as he pulled her behind him. Foxface let out an unenviable scream as she was thrown back. Landing on her bottom, she watched with wide eyes as Thresh suddenly appeared from the cluster of grass and grabbed Cedric by the neck. The boy in trouble choked on his breath as he tried to unlatch himself from the vice grip harnessed around him. Twisting about, he found himself glued in Thresh's hand and tried a different approach in breaking free. He coughed, his lungs burned for oxygen. Go, he shouted, kicking the taller boy in the chin. Happily, Cedric allowed his body to drop to the ground in freedom as he watched the other boy stumble for balance. Not taking another chance with him, he pivoted on his foot and grabbed Foxface by the wrist. Together, the two bolted away from him without chancing another look back. I told you, Foxface shouted as they emerged from the grassy fields. Cedric didn't bother challenging her statement as he continued to run towards the cornucopia. They needed to hide and no one would try to search for them in there. Or well, he hoped no one would. In here. He beckoned, leading her into the empty room. Any traces of the bloodbath that had occurred in it from days ago had been cleansed, and it was as if it was just waiting to be filled with all sorts of fruits and gifts. What were you thinking? Foxface seethed in her calm tone, rupturing his thoughts. Her breathing was labored, but she still managed to come out with her composed voice to question his idiotic thinking. That I was going to die and I had to find a way out of all of this. Cedric answered, not willing to participate in her lecture. Foxface shook her head and leaned against the metallic buildings of the cornucopia. So you thought that going up against Thresh would solve that issue for you? She interrogated. No. Then why did you do it? We could have gotten out, we could have left safe and sound, we could have done better without the what are you doing? She yelled as Cedric approached her in a hastened pace. He shot her a look to shut up, but Foxface had enough of it. She was tired of being forced to keep her emotions checked, and she direly needed a time to vent it all out. She needed to. Thresh was with them. Those were the words that Cedric mouthed that made her instantly shut up. Frantically searching for an escape route with wide eyes, she allowed Cedric to cautiously put a hand over her mouth as he softly led them all the way to the back of the cornucopia. It was the darkest area of the whole place, Foxface mentally reasoned in her head. But it was also the most secluded. So if Thresh had the sudden urge to venture in further and search for them, they were doomed the first second his eyes would land on their cowering figures. Foxface forced her eyes to close tightly as the bulky District 11 tribute's footsteps caused loud, hulking sounds to resonate throughout the whole room. Thoughts of death were just pounding at her head, but she knew she had to stay strong, keep her act together. And after a couple minutes of chanting this mantra in her head, she finally felt the hand over her mouth leave and instead hold her hand securely. With that simple gesture, Foxface squeezed Cedric's hand and let him lead her back into a new light moonlight. How long? She whispered as the two of them gathered at the cornucopia's hollowed entrance. Cedric shrugged as he sat as far as he could from her. Whether if it was because something was bothering him, or if we was respecting her space, Foxface didn't care. All of a sudden, She just needed the assurance that somebody was there with her. He took his time. Even stayed inside with us for an hour or so. I think he knew we were there, but at that same time it looked like he was too tired to pursue us. You know why? Cedric answered. Foxface gave him the rarest of smiles and gestured a hand at herself. See anything different about me? She asked. Your hair is a bit more tasseled than usual, but otherwise no. Nothing new. Cedric replied. The girl in front of him could really feel the effects of his ego starting to build up again, and decided that she wouldn't do anything to stop him from being himself this time. Cedric was a reminder for her that she was slowly losing herself in these games. For in the nights that she spent alone and in the days that she spent in the shadows hunting for food, she began to act like a robot programmed to survive. Pathetic, red-headed robot. Thanks, Foxface said dryly. Even though she agreed into letting him have his fun for the night, she was still willing to protect her dignity in some ways. But look closer than that and you'll see that I don't have a knife. Cedric cut off in disbelief. He stared at her as if she was someone new. Did you throw it at him? He asked. Foxface shook her head. You probably didn't notice it, but as you were struggling up there, I charged at him with it. I managed to stab him in his side before he pushed me away. And, she paused as if she were adding an afterthought, I've never been able to throw perfectly with a knife. Cedric chuckled. You're telling me this because? He mused. He knew she was just trying to play things off, that she was still in an aftershock. But still. He wanted to know. I know you won't kill me. Foxface mumbled almost mutely. This response took Cedric by surprise as he picked Foxface to be the least sentimental or trusting in any way possible. But just then, by the way she said those words, she was so sure of herself. She actually admitted that she trusted him. Will you? She softly asked seconds later. Cedric looked up at the sky and deemed it right to be starless. But as he was about to answer her question, he already heard her quietly snoring. She must not sleep a lot, he thought, taking the first night watch of their days together as allies. When the next morning arose with the sun coming up out of the horizon of trees, Cedric was struggling between whether he should wake up his fellow tribute or not. By the looks of her serene appearance and deep breathing, she was well into her slumber. And truly, Cedric would have loved to have let her sleep on. But with them wide in the open he couldn't risk it. Climbing to his feet, Cedric made his way to the sleeping girl and gently shook her awake. Wake up, Foxface. Come on now, he said aloud. Foxface stirred and turned, but to no avail remained in her comatose-like state. Cedric sighed and pushed the hair out her face before deciding to lift her up and bring her into a safer sanctuary. If one of them was going to make sure they were going to survive for the next few days together, then one of them had to set out the task of procuring some vital objects. Food being the main one. Setting her down deep into the cornucopia, Cedric lay his jacket across her body and after deeming her hidden well enough, set out into the forest. He suspected that she would not wake until noon of, and until then, he planned to have at least enough food rations to last them till the night. If not, one of them would have to starve, and that wasn't something he was too keen on experiencing. What's this? Cedric mused to himself, snatching up a discreet trap set out by someone. It was carefully hidden and set as to capture any unfortunate animal, and if not, maybe even a person. I hate to steal, Cedric mumbled, staring at the contraption. But these are the games. Here we're all thought of delusive children awaiting for slaughter. So, Cedric shook his head and left the trap be. No, he had already done enough to damage his image and morals. He'd killed a person, and he wouldn't dare kill another one because he had stolen their supposed catch of the day. But it wouldn't hurt to copy their idea, right? Bingo! Jogging towards the nearest body of water, Cedric planned to copy something of the same trap that the tribute had set up for her prey. Only this time he would be fishing for his food, not trapping it. Cedric nearly chuckled to himself as he realized how resourceful he was being right now. Sure, he had been helpful back at Hogwarts, but that was because with a flick of a wand, he could almost do anything he wanted in order to assist someone. Now he actually had to think more to help. And perhaps that was his downfall. As he came into a nice clearing with decent-sized pond, an arrow whizzed past him, barely shooting through his scalp. Raising a finger to catch a delicate drop of blood, Cedric stared at his attacker and saw none other than the girl on fire. Cedric frowned as his stance and eyes grew wary of her fingers. They were poised in the position one would find a person in after releasing an arrow. Now all he had to do was make sure that they didn't find themselves a new arrow to launch at him. Katniss Everdeen, right? Cedric conversed, attempting to erase all fear from his system and voice. She nodded, equally leery of him. The girl who volunteered for her sister. Cedric continued on, putting one foot forward. Katniss's hand shot to her pack of arrows, but just as quickly, Cedric raised his hands up disarmingly. You're quite admirable for doing that. I know that not many would, given if they were in the same situation you had been in, he said slowly. Katniss's eyes narrowed down at him. What do you want? She asked bluntly. She was a plain and simple girl to the point as well, Cedric noted. He smiled. A safe pass that would ensure me a harmless time at the pond, he answered. Unfortunately, Katniss wasn't buying it. She grabbed an arrow from her pack and leveled it to her bow. And for what? To poison it? She questioned. Hardly. I just want to go and fish, said Cedric. With what? An arrow. Cedric grinned, pulling the one she had shot at him off the ground. Katniss seemed displeased by the idea of him utilizing it to his needs, but could not find the words to just tell him off. He hadn't posed himself as a threat yet, so she decided to at least give him the benefit of the doubt. Plus, he had escaped her shot and she never missed. Never. Well? Cedric asked. Katniss sighed and nodded her head. Go, but I'm keeping an eye on you, she stated. Cedric nodded back. Wouldn't have it any other way. And just like that, they were set on their temporary silent alliance. Cedric would catch the fish and throw them to shore whilst Katniss kept an eye out for any surprise attack in on him. When he was done gathering 6 fish in total, he grabbed one and threw it at Katniss. Surprised, the girl shot her arrow and nailed the thing to a tree. Cedric laughed. My apologies, I probably shouldn't have thrown it, he said. Katniss glared at him. Got it. I'll be going now, Katniss. Thank you for not killing me. He bowed his head and with that, departed, collecting his scattered fish in the process. Cedric had not met any more tributes during his excursion back to the cornucopia, although what greeted him when he had returned was a bit more startling than he would have liked. Having has a pleasant walk back to their temporary camp, he had been whistling a quiet tune until something light pounced on his back. Dropping all pretenses of being carefree, Cedric's hand shot up to the small ones strangling his neck and tried to pry them off of him. It was futile for him to that though, as the person seemed intent on bringing an end to his life. So Cedric did the next best thing and slammed his attacker against the plating of the cornucopia. They let go and dropped to the ground. What did you do to her? Cedric demanded, hanging the person against the wall. His knuckles were white as he held them by the neck, and in that moment, he would have killed them if not for the fact that he did not know where his partner was. C said. Rick, Foxface. Dropping his hold on her, Cedric quickly caught Foxface from her slow descent to the ground and carefully leaned her against the wall. Staring at her paling face, Cedric began to curse himself as he repeatedly apologized for his rash actions. Coughing, Foxface sat up straighter and shook her head. It was a mistake on both our parts. She flinched as she applied some pressure on her neck. On a closer examination, Cedric saw the skin where his hand had made contact bruise. I'm sure I'll be fine. Cedric sighed and sat beside her, having completely forgotten about his growing hunger. I'm sorry, he said one last time. Foxface didn't reply to that and stared at the garbled fish. She honestly was surprised that he was capable of performing such a feat. But her thoughts were startled with his unexpected yawn. Quirking an eyebrow, Foxface watched as he ran a hand through his hair. Did you get any sleep? She asked. Cedric shrugged. I like to call it a light nap, he replied. Foxface frowned and stood up, venturing to her previous makeshift bed. She grabbed what she guessed to be his jacket and threw it at him. Sleep, she commanded, leaving no space for an argument. Cedric stared at her as if she had 3 heads and 4 arms. What? He asked. Rolling her eyes, Foxface grabbed his jacket and rolled it into an improvised pillow. Sleep, she repeated. Cedric frowned. No, Not yet, at least. I still have to. Impatiently, Foxface cut him off. Listen, she began. I've managed so far without you. I have more energy than you. I think I can handle roasting some fish. She glowered at Cedric as he was about to argue back. Go to sleep and I'll wake you up when all of it's ready. She finished. Sighing, Cedric realized that he was fighting a losing battle and decided to cave into her wishes and rested his head against his jacket. Surprisingly, it provided a better comfort to his head than he had expected, and his dreams hit him much more quickly than he would have desired. The next time he came to his senses was when the evident smell of something burning entered his nostrils. Eyes shooting open, Cedric rose up and wildly looked around. Everything was dark with the exception of moonlight pouring into the cave-like area from the mouth of the cornucopia. Foxface, he whispered, daring to go outside. When he did, he was amused at the sight of her stamping out the remnants of a fire. As much as she had come off of as cold and distant to him, he found it strangely comical that even she, the great Foxface, could not kill a fire. Need help? He finally offered, taking pity in her useless efforts. He would have loved to bask in her moment of weakness if it were not for the fact that the smoke arising from the fire could attract the careers. Foxface wildly whirled around at his sudden appearance, eyes bright and wide in the moonlight cascading around her. Only when she saw him did she fix her posture and etch a deep frown on her lips. Crossing her arms, she stepped back from the fire, quickly covering the gap between them. Cedric set to the task of putting it out in 5 seconds before flashing her with a cocky grin. Foxface rolled her eyes and picked up the fish she had cooked. Grabbing her discarded coat from the ground, she headed back into the cornucopia without a word. Sorry? Cedric hesitantly said. He watched as she plopped down midway into their camp and began her meal. He sighed and took his share of the catch and ate as well. Even though he had gotten a few good hours of sleep, his dreams were still stressful and he had yet to make up for all the hours he had lost for the past days. Do you think one of us will win? Foxface asked. Speechless at her sudden outburst of conversation, Cedric took a while to negatively respond. Foxface sighed at his answer and fiddled with her meal. She was halfway done, and she could enthusiastically admit that the fish had been one of the best meals she had eaten so far since her arrival at the arena. Well, what do you think? She said. Cedric paused for a second. What do I think? He repeated to himself. I think we might make it. Together, he said. Foxface nose scrunched up. How can you say that so confidently? Do you doubt me? Cedric's gaze lifted to catch hers. The redhead was compelled to snap at him, but held her tongue and let the seconds tick by in silence. Even back home, where she had family and friends that cared, no one dared to promise or even assure her that everything would be fine. She wouldn't be alone, but that was because you couldn't do that. Not in her district at least. Not in theirs. Constantly under relentless surveillance, there was no time to be brave to step up. In her district, you only watched out for yourself and lived in constant fear. At least that was how the people in her life viewed things. Foxface, Cedric nudged her foot, as if to put emphasis on calling her back to earth. You're not alone in this, you know? He said. She didn't reply. You all right? He asked. Foxface stared at him, vaguely aware that he had leaned in closer to inspect her disarray of thoughts. Her mind was in a turmoil, wandering between disbelief and relief. Should she believe in him? Was it safe? Who did that to you? She questioned, noticing the thin line on his cheek. Cedric's hand quickly shot up to trace the wound and visibly flinched. Apparently, the cut was much deeper than it seemed, but he braved it with a nonchalant smile and shrug. Believe me when I say you weren't the only girl intent on killing me today, he said. Foxface's eyes narrowed as she urged him to say who it was. Katniss Everdeen, the District 12 volunteer. Cedric answered. Foxface scowled at the sound of her name. To her, Katniss was one of the bigger threats out there. Were you actually concerned about me, Foxface? Cedric teased, easing the tension rolling off of her body. Foxface frowned as she leaned forward and pressed a cold finger on his cheek. Cringing at the contact, Cedric watched her curiously as she traced the long cut. Does it hurt a lot? She asked. Well, when people aren't touching it. Cedric responded, chuckling as she pulled her hand back, as if scorched by his skin. But I don't mind, Foxface, it's rare of you to show you care. He added on. Foxface rolled her eyes and leaned back, closing them. Adeline. Huh? Cedric asked as if taken off guard. You really should pay more attention, she said, giving him one of her rare smiles. My name's Adeline.